Hey guys, tonight we begin an extraordinary journey that started on one freezing night 30,000 years ago. A night that would change the course of human history forever. Picture this. You're huddled around a crackling fire, the bitter wind howling through the darkness. Your stomach growls with hunger, and somewhere in the shadows beyond your small circle of light, you hear it. The haunting call of wolves. But instead of running in terror, something incredible is about to happen. One brave wolf will take a step that saves two species from extinction. And here's the mind-blowing part. Without this single moment of trust, you and I might not even be here tonight. Before we step back in time together, I have to ask, do you have a furry friend curled up beside you right now? Maybe a dog who's listening to my voice with those knowing eyes? If this story already has you hooked, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And I'm genuinely curious, what's your dog's name? And are they as fascinated by ancient history as you are? Drop their name in the comments. I love meeting our four-legged listeners too. Now let's dim those lights and travel back to witness the night that changed everything. The world was dying. Ice stretched across continents like a frozen tomb. Our ancestors lived as nomads, constantly moving, constantly hunting, constantly one meal away from starvation. Death lurked everywhere, in the cold that could freeze you solid in hours, in the massive predators that ruled the night, and in the endless, brutal competition for survival. But on this particular night, somewhere in the frozen wilderness of ancient Eurasia, magic was about to happen around a small human campfire. The hunting party had just returned with their prize, a young mammoth that would feed their tribe for weeks. The kill was fresh, the blood still warm, and the scent. Oh, the scent carried for miles on the icy wind, drawing hungry eyes from the darkness, yellow eyes, wolf eyes, the entire pack of them, circling just beyond the firelight. Now here's where our story takes an incredible turn. Everything we thought we knew about how dogs came to be, completely wrong. For generations we imagined our ancestors capturing wolf pups, forcing them into submission, gradually breaking their wild spirits. But the truth is far more beautiful than that, because that night it wasn't humans who made the first move. It was the wolves. The pack leader, let's call her Luna because every great love story needs a name, did something that defied millions of years of evolution. Instead of attacking or retreating, she stepped toward the fire, toward the humans, toward creatures that should have been her enemies. Can you feel the tension in that moment? The exhausted humans, gripping their spears, suddenly face to face with a predator that could tear them apart. And Luna, fighting against every instinct, screaming at her to flee from these strange upright creatures with their mysterious flames. But here's what happened next that will give you chills. Neither side chose violence. Luna took another step forward, and one of the humans, perhaps a woman, because women often played crucial roles in these ancient partnerships, did something extraordinary. She reached for a piece of mammoth meat and threw it toward this wild wolf. That simple act of sharing food across species lines was the beginning of the most successful partnership in the history of life on Earth. But wait, it gets even more incredible. Recent discoveries have blown scientists' minds. These wolves who became our dogs, they weren't the strongest or the fiercest. They were the friendliest. The ones brave enough to trust, curious enough to approach, gentle enough to be trusted in return. And here's the shocker that changes everything we thought about evolution. This transformation happened fast, lightning fast. In 2008, researchers found a dog skull in Belgium that's 31,700 years old. Not a wolf skull, a dog skull. With the shortened snout, the rounded head, the smaller teeth that make dogs. Well, dogs. We're talking about revolutionary changes in just a few thousand years. The moment humans and wolves decided to trust each other, evolution hit the turbo button. Think about Luna for a moment. That first night, as she finished the meat and settled down just outside the circle of firelight, she had no idea she was changing the world. She couldn't know that her decision would eventually create everything from tiny purse dogs to massive sled pullers, from palace guardians to farm helpers. But here's the part that might surprise you. The humans needed Luna just as desperately as she needed them. Because what happened next gave humans a superpower that changed everything. Suddenly they had early warning systems for danger, hunting partners who could track prey for days, living heaters for those brutal Ice Age nights, and something even more precious, companionship in a world where loneliness could kill you just as surely as starvation. Some scientists believe this partnership was so game-changing that it's the reason you and I are here tonight, while our Neanderthal cousins disappeared into history. While Neanderthals remained solo hunters, humans with their wolf partners could explore new territories, survive in impossible climates, and take down prey that would have been beyond their reach alone. But let's return to that magical first night, because what happened as the fire died down will touch your heart. Hours passed. The flames crackled lower. The other wolves had retreated into the darkness, confused by their leader's bizarre behavior. But Luna discovered something her wild cousins never would: the incredible comfort of interspecies friendship. And then, in the soft orange glow of dying embers, something beautiful occurred. One of the human children, curious and fearless in the way only children can be, extended a tiny hand toward Luna. Luna, despite every survival instinct screaming at her to flee, allowed that child to touch her fur. That gentle touch was the first time in Earth's history that a wild predator willingly accepted affection from a human. It was a moment of trust so profound that it echoes through every tail wag, every loyal look, every protective bark you've ever experienced with your own dog. By morning, when her pack howled for her to rejoin them in the wilderness, Luna looked once at the dying embers, once at the small group of creatures who had shown her kindness, and she stayed. The humans made their choice too. They shared their water with her, offered her breakfast scraps, and when they packed up to continue their nomadic journey, they didn't drive her away. For the first time in history, two species chose to walk together into an uncertain future, and so began the greatest love story between two species, built not on dominance or control, but on trust, shared meals, and something that can only be called friendship. Imagine Luna that first morning, walking alongside her new human family, her tail perhaps wagging for the very first time in wolf history. She had no idea that 30,000 years later, over 900 million dogs would call humans their family across every corner of the globe. But what if I told you that Luna's story gets even more incredible? That hidden in her DNA, scientists have discovered secrets so shocking, they've had to rewrite everything we thought we knew about life itself. Secrets that reveal not just how dogs came to be, but why some dogs seem to read our minds, and others, well, others carry the memories of their wild ancestors in ways that will absolutely blow your mind. What Luna couldn't have known, as she made that life-changing decision by the firelight, was that she was carrying within her cells a secret that would take scientists 30,000 years to uncover. A secret so mind-blowing that when they finally cracked the code in 2008, it forced them to rewrite the entire story of evolution itself. Picture a laboratory in Germany where Dr. Johannes Krauss is hunched over what looks like an ordinary piece of ancient bone. But this isn't just any bone. It's a fragment of skull from a dog that died 33,000 years ago. And what he's about to discover will send shockwaves through the scientific world. As Dr. Krauss carefully extracts DNA from this ancient skull, he has no idea he's about to uncover evidence of not one, but multiple domestication events scattered across the globe. Evidence that will prove dogs didn't come from just one Luna, but from dozens of brave wolves making the same incredible choice in different places at different times. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. The DNA tells a story that seems impossible. These ancient wolves weren't gradually changing over millions of years. They were transforming at warp speed, so fast that it breaks every rule we thought we knew about how evolution works. Have you ever wondered why your golden retriever looks nothing like a wolf, but your husky... Well, your husky could probably fool a wolf pack in the right lighting? The answer lies in something called mitochondrial DNA, and trust me, this is where our story gets seriously fascinating. Think of mitochondrial DNA as a genetic time machine. Unlike regular DNA that gets shuffled every generation like a deck of cards, mitochondrial DNA passes directly from mother to offspring, unchanged, creating a perfect family tree that scientists can trace back through millennia. When researchers started mapping these genetic family trees from dogs around the world, they expected to find one simple story: Luna's descendants spreading across the globe. Instead, they found something that made their jaws drop: multiple family trees, multiple origins, multiple Lunas. Dr. Peter Savolainen from the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm spent 15 years analysing DNA from over 650 dogs worldwide, and what he discovered was revolutionary. The genetic evidence showed that dogs were domesticated not once, but at least twice, maybe even more times, in completely different parts of the world. Imagine that. While Luna was making friends with humans in Siberia, another brave wolf was doing the exact same thing thousands of miles away in what's now the Middle East, and possibly another in Southeast Asia. These wolves had never met, never shared the same territory, yet they all made the same incredible choice to trust humans. But here's the part that will absolutely blow your mind. Some of these domestication events happened so close together in time that it's almost like the wolves were conspiring, as if some genetic switch got flipped simultaneously across different continents, making certain wolves suddenly more likely to befriend humans. Scientists call this parallel evolution, but I like to think of it as something more magical, as if the universe itself was pushing these two species together because it knew they'd be stronger as a team. Now let's talk about something that sounds like science fiction but is absolutely real: the genetics of friendliness. Dr. Bridget von Holt at Princeton University made a discovery that changed everything. She found that the genetic mutations that make dogs friendly are located in the exact same chromosomal region associated with Williams-Buren syndrome in humans. You know what Williams-Buren syndrome causes? Extreme friendliness and hypersociability. Think about that for a second. The same genetic pathway that can make humans incredibly outgoing and trusting is what turned fierce wolves into tail-wagging companions. It's as if nature had a friendship gene just waiting to be activated. But the genetic mysteries get even stranger when we look at what happened to these wolf dogs after domestication began. Here's something that might surprise you. Early dogs were actually much more genetically diverse than modern dogs. That's right. Ancient dogs had more genetic variety than the hundreds of breeds we see today. How is that possible? Well, here's where humans accidentally created a genetic catastrophe that we're still dealing with today. As people began selectively breeding dogs for specific traits, longer legs for hunting, thicker coats for cold climates, smaller sizes for companionship, they unknowingly created what scientists call genetic bottlenecks. Essentially, we took the incredible genetic diversity that nature had created and squeezed it through a tiny funnel. Dr. Heidi Parker from the National Human Genome Research Institute discovered that many of today's dog breeds trace back to just a handful of founding individuals. Some breeds have genetic diversity so limited that they're essentially one big extended family. And we're not talking distant cousins, we're talking siblings having babies for generations. This is why your purebred German Shepherd might have hip problems, or why bulldogs can barely breathe. We traded genetic health for aesthetic preferences, and the dogs paid the price. But here's where the story takes an incredible turn that gives us hope. Ancient dog DNA is helping us understand what we lost, and more importantly, how we might get it back. Researchers are now using genetic information from archaeological dog remains to identify the healthiest, most diverse bloodlines from thousands of years ago. It's like having a genetic roadmap back to dogs' healthiest selves. Dr. Laurent France from Queen Mary University of London recently completed the most comprehensive study of ancient dog DNA ever undertaken. His team analysed genetic material from 27 ancient dogs spanning 11,000 years, and what they found was remarkable. These ancient dogs had genetic adaptations we've never seen in modern breeds. Some had enhanced immune systems that could fight off diseases that devastate modern dogs. Others had metabolic efficiency that allowed them to thrive on diets that would make today's dogs sick. But perhaps the most incredible discovery was this. Many ancient dogs retained genetic sequences that are completely absent in modern dogs, but still present in wolves. These ghost genes, as scientists call them, might hold the key to traits we didn't even know we were missing. Imagine if we could give modern dogs the disease resistance of their ancient ancestors, or the athletic ability of wolves, while keeping all the friendliness and loyalty that makes them perfect companions. Some researchers are already working on this. They're using a process called genetic rescue, carefully introducing genetic material from the healthiest wild populations back into domestic breeds. It's not about making dogs wild again, it's about making them whole again. But here's what really gets me excited about these genetic discoveries. They're revealing that dogs might actually be smarter than we ever imagined. Recent studies have found that dogs have evolved specific genetic mutations that affect brain development in ways that make them incredibly good at reading human facial expressions and body language. We're talking about genetic changes that literally rewired their brains to understand us better. Dr. Julian Kaminsky at the Max Planck Institute discovered that dogs have muscles around their eyes that wolves don't have. Muscles that let them make those irresistible puppy dog eyes that melt human hearts. And get this, these muscles are controlled by the same genetic pathways that control human facial expressions. It's as if, over thousands of years, dogs evolved to speak our emotional language. But the genetic story gets even more incredible when we realize that this relationship changed us too. Humans who lived closely with dogs developed genetic mutations that affected everything from our immune systems to our social behaviors. We literally co-evolved. We shaped them, and they shaped us, down to the molecular level. And here's something that might make you look at your dog a little differently tonight. Every time your dog looks into your eyes, both of your brains release oxytocin, the same hormone released between human mothers and babies. Genetically speaking, your dog isn't just your pet. They're family in the most literal biological sense. As we've seen, the genetic evidence paints a picture of a relationship so profound that it rewrote the DNA of both species. But what happened when these genetically transformed wolves began to spread across the world? How did they help early humans not just survive, but thrive in ways that changed the course of history itself? Because the next part of our story reveals how this genetic partnership gave humans superpowers that their closest relatives, the Neanderthals, never developed. And those superpowers might be the reason you're here listening to this story tonight. 40,000 years ago, 2 human species roamed the Earth. Today, only one remains. And the reason you're here tonight listening to this story might have everything to do with a partnership that your ancestors made with wolves, while their cousins, the Neanderthals, chose to go it alone. This isn't just ancient history. This is the story of why you exist. Dr. Pat Shipman, a renowned anthropologist from Penn State, spent decades studying what she calls the most important partnership in human history. Her research revealed something that will fundamentally change how you think about survival, cooperation, and the power of unlikely alliances. Because here's what she discovered. Around the same time humans began domesticating wolves, Neanderthal populations started declining rapidly. Coincidence? Dr. Shipman doesn't think so, and when you hear the evidence, you won't either. Let's travel back to 35,000 years ago, to the frozen landscapes of Ice Age Europe. 2 groups of early humans are struggling to survive in one of the harshest environments Earth has ever known. Both are intelligent, both are resourceful, both are fighting the same brutal battle against extinction. But only one group is about to gain a secret weapon that changes everything. Imagine you're part of a Neanderthal hunting party. You're stronger than the other humans you sometimes encounter, more muscular, with a brain that's actually larger than theirs. You've survived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. You should have every advantage. But as you track a massive woolly rhinoceros across the tundra, something's wrong. You can see the beast's tracks in the snow, but they're old, maybe hours old. By the time you catch up, if you catch up, it might be too late. You might return to your family empty-handed while winter tightens its deadly grip. Now imagine the same scenario, but this time you're with the other group, the modern humans. You're smaller, perhaps not as individually strong, but you have something your Neanderthal cousins don't. Companions with 4 legs, wet noses, and an ability to track scents that would be completely invisible to your human senses. Your wolf partners can follow that rhinoceros trail even when it's days old. They can smell fear, detect injury, and most importantly, they can work as a coordinated team to bring down prey that would be impossible for humans alone to kill. This wasn't just hunting. This was warfare against extinction, and humans had just recruited the ultimate allies. Dr. Shipman's analysis of archaeological sites across Europe reveals a stunning pattern. At human settlements where dog remains are found, there's evidence of much larger and more frequent kills. We're talking about woolly mammoths, cave bears, giant elk, prey that would have seemed impossible for small groups of humans to tackle. But here's where it gets absolutely incredible. The partnership wasn't just about hunting bigger animals, it was about hunting smarter. Wolves brought something to the table that transformed human capabilities in ways that still seem almost magical today. Ever wonder why your dog can find your keys when you've looked everywhere? Or how they always know when someone's approaching your house before you hear anything? That's the same superpower that gave our ancestors a massive survival advantage. Dr. Raymond Coppinger's research at Hampshire College revealed that wolves can detect scents at concentrations nearly 100 times lower than humans can perceive. They can track a scent trail that's 3 days old, identify individual animals from miles away, and most importantly for survival, detect the presence of other predators long before humans would have any idea of the danger. Think about what this meant for a hunting party 30,000 years ago. Instead of wandering blindly across the frozen landscape, hoping to stumble upon prey, humans with wolf partners could track animals across vast distances with pinpoint accuracy. They became persistence hunters with supernatural senses. But the advantages went far beyond hunting. These partnerships created the world's first early warning systems. Picture your ancestors settling down for the night in their temporary shelter. The fire is dying down. The cold is seeping in, and somewhere in the darkness a cave lion is silently stalking closer. Without wolf companions, the first warning would be the moment of attack, usually too late. With wolves? They detect that predator from hundreds of yards away, alerting the humans with enough time to grab weapons, stoke the fire, or simply relocate to safer ground. Dr. Angela Perry from Durham University studied predator-prey relationships during the Ice Age and found something remarkable. Human settlements with evidence of dog presence show dramatically lower rates of what archaeologists call catastrophic site abandonment. Basically, camps that were attacked and hastily abandoned with belongings scattered everywhere. The wolves weren't just hunting partners, they were bodyguards. But here's where the survival partnership gets even more ingenious. Have you ever noticed how your dog seems to generate heat like a furry little furnace? That's not an accident of evolution. That's a survival feature that literally kept our ancestors alive during the Ice Age. Wolves have a body temperature about 2 degrees higher than humans, and their thick double coats create perfect insulation. Archaeological evidence from Siberian sites shows human remains positioned next to dog remains in sleeping areas. Not burial sites, but actual living spaces where people and dogs shared warmth to survive sub-zero temperatures. Dr. Darcy Morey from the University of Kansas calculated that sleeping with 2 or 3 dogs could provide enough additional warmth to mean the difference between life and death during the coldest nights. It was nature's first heating system, and then there's something most people never think about: waste management. I know it sounds mundane, but bear with me because this is actually crucial. Human settlements create waste, food scraps, organic refuse, things that attract scavengers and create disease. Without proper disposal, these sites become health hazards that can kill entire communities. Wolves solved this problem automatically. They cleaned up organic waste, eliminated pest species like rats and ravens that spread disease, and kept camp areas sanitary. They were the world's first public health officials, working 24/7 to keep their human partners healthy. But perhaps the most incredible advantage was psychological. Dr. Meg Davenport from Oxford University studied the mental health impacts of animal companionship in extreme survival situations. Her research suggests that the psychological benefits of having wolf companions during the Ice Age might have been just as important as the practical ones. Isolation and despair could kill you just as surely as predators or starvation. The stress of constant survival, the loss of family members, the endless uncertainty. These psychological pressures drove many early human groups to make fatal decisions or simply give up. Humans with wolf companions had something their Neanderthal cousins lacked: emotional support, companionship, and most importantly, hope. When everything seemed hopeless, when the hunt had failed and winter was closing in, they had loyal friends who never gave up, never lost faith, never stopped trying. Some researchers believe this psychological advantage was so significant that it affected human brain development. The reduced stress from having reliable companions allowed our ancestors to think more clearly, plan more effectively, and innovate more creatively. And innovation is exactly what happened next. Archaeological evidence shows that human tool-making and artistic expression exploded around the same time that dog domestication became widespread. Cave paintings from this period often feature humans and dogs working together, creating art, even playing. It's as if the partnership with wolves freed up mental energy that humans had been using just to survive, allowing them to become the creative, innovative species that would eventually build civilizations. Meanwhile, Neanderthal technology remained relatively static. Their tools barely changed for tens of thousands of years. They were surviving, but they weren't thriving. They weren't evolving. They weren't adapting. Dr. Clive Finlayson from the Gibraltar Museum argues that this difference in adaptability, this willingness to form partnerships with other species, might have been the crucial factor that determined which human species survived and which didn't. The Neanderthals were magnificent. They were strong, intelligent, perfectly adapted to their environment. But they were also isolated. They relied entirely on their own abilities, their own strength, their own intelligence. Humans took a different path. They recognized that survival wasn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It was about building alliances, creating partnerships, finding ways to combine different strengths to overcome impossible challenges. And that choice, that willingness to trust, to cooperate, to share resources with another species, that choice echoes through every aspect of human civilization today. Think about it. Every time you collaborate with a colleague, every time you form a friendship, every time you choose cooperation over competition, you're honoring the same principle that saved our species 30,000 years ago. But this partnership didn't just help humans survive the Ice Age, it transformed them into something unprecedented. Explorers, adventurers, pioneers who could thrive in environments that would have been impossible to conquer alone. And when the ice began to melt and new territories opened up, guess who was ready to explore them? Humans and their four-legged partners were about to embark on the greatest journey in the history of life on Earth. A journey that would take them to every continent, every climate, every corner of the globe. And the story of how they did it, well, that's about to reveal secrets of courage and loyalty that will leave you amazed. Sometimes the most incredible discoveries happen by accident. And in 1959, a Russian scientist named Dmitry Belyaev set out to answer a simple question about fur quality that would accidentally unlock the secret of how Luna became your beloved companion. A secret that took him 60 years to discover, but took nature 30,000. What Belyaev had no idea he was about to prove was that everything we thought we knew about domestication was completely backwards, and the implications of his discovery are so profound that they're still rewriting biology textbooks today. Here's the setup. Soviet Russia, height of the Cold War, and Belyaev is running a fox fur farm in Siberia. His official job was to improve the quality of fox pelts for the fashion industry. But Belyaev was curious about something else entirely. He wondered if he could recreate the entire process of dog domestication, from wild animal to loyal companion, in a single human lifetime. The Communist Party thought he was working on better fur coats. He was actually conducting the most important evolution experiment in human history. Now here's where it gets absolutely wild. Belyaev started with 130 wild silver foxes, animals so aggressive and fearful that they would attack handlers, urinate from stress, and literally die from the shock of human contact. These weren't just unfriendly. They were psychologically programmed to see humans as mortal enemies. His plan was simple. Breed only the foxes that showed even the slightest tolerance for human contact. Not friendship, not affection, just the ones that didn't immediately try to bite his researchers' faces off. What happened next broke every rule scientists thought they knew about evolution. Within just 6 generations, that's roughly 18 years, something impossible started happening. The foxes weren't just becoming friendlier, they were becoming dogs. Dr. Lyudmila Trut, who worked alongside Belyaev for decades, documented changes that seemed to defy the laws of biology. These foxes started wagging their tails when they saw humans. They began seeking out human attention. They developed a playfulness that their wild ancestors had never shown. But here's the mind-blowing part. The physical changes that accompanied this behavioral transformation. Remember how we talked about Luna's descendants developing shorter snouts and more rounded skulls? Beliaev's foxes did the exact same thing, but in fast forward. Their ears became floppy, their tails started curling, their coats developed patches of white and brown that had never existed in wild silver foxes. Think about that for a moment. Belyaev was selecting only for behavior, just friendliness toward humans. He wasn't trying to change how these foxes looked, but somehow choosing for tameness automatically triggered a cascade of physical changes that made these foxes look exactly like the dogs our ancestors had developed over thousands of years. It was as if there was some invisible genetic switch labeled domestication, and the moment you flipped it, everything else followed automatically. Dr. Anna Kukakova, who now continues this research at the University of Illinois, discovered that this isn't just coincidence. The genes that control behavior in mammals are intimately connected to the genes that control physical development. When you select for friendliness, you're actually selecting for a whole package of traits that come bundled together. But the Siberian experiment revealed something even more incredible, and this is where our understanding of Luna's transformation gets absolutely revolutionary. The friendly foxes weren't just becoming dog-like in appearance, they were becoming dog-like in their brain chemistry. Their stress hormone levels plummeted, their juvenile characteristics extended into adulthood, what scientists call neoteny. They retained playful, curious behaviors that wild foxes lose after puppyhood. In other words, domestication doesn't just make animals friendlier, it makes them essentially permanent teenagers, playful, curious, eager to please, and perpetually optimistic about the world around them. Does this sound familiar? Have you ever wondered why your fully grown dog still acts like a puppy sometimes, still gets excited about the simplest things, still looks at you with those bright, hopeful eyes that seem to say, "What adventure are we going on today?" That's not just cute behavior. That's the genetic signature of domestication. 30,000 years of evolution selecting for animals that never quite grow up, that keep the wonder and trust of youth throughout their entire lives. But here's where Belyaev's experiment gets even more fascinating, and a little bit heartbreaking. He also created a control group, foxes bred specifically for aggression and fear of humans. These foxes became increasingly wild, increasingly hostile, developing physical traits that made them look more and more wolf-like with each generation. The comparison was stark. The friendly foxes looked like dogs, acted like dogs, and even sounded like dogs. They developed barks, something wild foxes rarely do. The aggressive foxes became virtual wolves, with longer snouts, straighter tails, and eyes that held no warmth for humans whatsoever. It was evolution in real time, showing how the choice between cooperation and conflict literally reshapes species at the genetic level. Dr. Brian Hare from Duke University, who studied Belyaev's foxes extensively, made a discovery that will change how you think about intelligence itself. The friendly foxes weren't just nicer, they were smarter, at least when it came to understanding human communication. These domesticated foxes could read human pointing gestures, something their wild cousins couldn't do. They could interpret human facial expressions. They even showed what researchers call theory of mind, the ability to understand that humans have thoughts and intentions different from their own. Domestication, it turns out, doesn't just create obedient animals. It creates animals capable of true interspecies communication and understanding. But perhaps the most stunning revelation from the Siberian experiment was this. The genetic changes that created friendly, dog-like foxes happened incredibly fast, but they also happened automatically. Belyaev wasn't engineering these changes, he was simply creating the conditions where they could emerge. This suggests that Luna and her fellow wolves 30,000 years ago weren't gradually trained or forced into domestication. They were genetically predisposed for it. Some wolves carried within their DNA the potential to become dogs, and all they needed was the right environment, a campfire, some shared meat, and humans willing to take a chance on friendship. Dr. Adam Boyko from Cornell University analyzed the genomes of Belyaev's foxes and found something remarkable. The genetic mutations that appeared in the friendly foxes were nearly identical to the mutations found in ancient dog DNA. It was as if Belyaev had discovered a universal recipe for domestication, a genetic pathway that leads from wild predator to loyal companion. But the implications go far beyond just understanding dogs and foxes. The Siberian experiment proved that major evolutionary changes can happen much faster than anyone thought possible. It showed that behavior and physical appearance are connected in ways we're still trying to understand. And most importantly, it demonstrated that cooperation and friendliness aren't just nice personality traits. They're fundamental forces that can reshape entire species. Some researchers now believe that humans underwent a similar process of self-domestication. Dr. Richard Wrangham from Harvard University argues that as humans became more cooperative and less aggressive over time, we also developed more childlike features, smaller faces, less pronounced brows, more expressive eyes. In other words, the same process that turned wolves into dogs might have turned our aggressive ancestors into the cooperative, communicative humans we are today. Think about what this means. The partnership between humans and wolves didn't just create dogs. It might have created modern humans as well. We shaped each other, generation by generation, each species becoming more cooperative, more communicative, more capable of the trust and friendship that defines our relationship today. And here's the beautiful irony. Belyaev set out to make better fur coats and ended up proving that love and cooperation are among the most powerful evolutionary forces on Earth. His friendly foxes are still thriving in Siberia today, living proof that kindness isn't just a nice idea. It's a biological imperative that can transform entire species in just a few generations. But if genetic changes could happen so quickly in a laboratory, imagine what was possible in the vast, challenging world where Luna and her descendants had to survive. Because the real test of this new partnership wasn't in the safety of human camps. It was out there in the wild, where these newly domesticated wolves had to prove that friendship could be stronger than fear and cooperation more powerful than aggression. The story of how they passed that test and what it revealed about the unbreakable bond between our species is about to take us to some of the most moving archaeological discoveries ever made. Deep beneath the soil of Germany's Rhine Valley, archaeologist Dr. Liane Giemsch made a discovery in 2008 that would make her hands tremble as she carefully brushed away 14,000 years of earth. What she unearthed wasn't just bones. It was evidence of a love so profound that it survived longer than entire civilizations. The Bonn Oberkassel burial site revealed something that challenged everything archaeologists thought they knew about ancient human behavior, because lying beside the remains of two humans was the skeleton of a dog that had been sick, crippled, and completely unable to contribute to the survival of the group, yet had been lovingly cared for until the very end of its life. This wasn't just domestication. This was devotion. Dr. Giemsch's analysis revealed that this ancient dog had suffered from distemper, a viral disease that would have left it weak, possibly blind, and definitely useless for hunting or protection. In a world where every calorie mattered and every resource was precious, this dog should have been abandoned to die. Instead, someone loved it enough to keep it alive for months, maybe years, feeding it soft foods, carrying it when it couldn't walk, providing medical care with whatever primitive treatments were available. And when it finally died, they loved it enough to bury it alongside their own family members. But here's what makes this discovery absolutely revolutionary. The bones tell us a story that words never could. When Dr. Mietje Germonprez from the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences began studying ancient dog skeletons from across Europe, she developed techniques for reading bone evidence that would make Sherlock Holmes jealous. Every scratch, every healed fracture, every unusual wear pattern tells a story about how these animals lived, how they died, and most importantly, how they were treated by their human companions. The bones from Bonauber Castle show something remarkable. The dog's skull had been deliberately shaped through careful breeding: shorter snout, more rounded cranium, larger eye sockets that gave it an almost childlike appearance. This wasn't natural selection. This was intentional selection for traits that made dogs more appealing to human caregivers. But it gets even more fascinating when you examine the evidence of injury and healing. Ancient dog skeletons from archaeological sites across the globe show patterns of healed bone fractures that tell incredible stories of human compassion. Dr. Darcy Morey's comprehensive analysis of over 300 ancient dog remains revealed that many of these animals survived injuries that would have been fatal without immediate and ongoing human intervention. Broken legs that healed perfectly straight, suggesting careful splinting. Skull fractures that mended completely, indicating protection during vulnerable recovery periods. Dental work. Yes, dental work, where damaged teeth were carefully filed down to prevent infection. Think about what this means. 15,000 years ago, during one of the harshest periods in human history, people were performing veterinary medicine on their animal companions. They were setting broken bones, treating infections, and providing rehabilitation therapy for injured dogs. But the most incredible evidence comes from what archaeologists call articulated burials, skeletons that remained connected exactly as they were positioned at death, preserving the final moments of these ancient relationships. Dr. Angela Perry from Durham University discovered a burial site in Siberia where a human and dog were found in a position that brought tears to her eyes. The human's arm was wrapped around the dog, and chemical analysis of the surrounding soil showed that both had died at the same time, possibly from the same illness or injury. Someone had chosen to be buried holding their beloved companion, ensuring they would face whatever came next together. The skull measurements tell their own incredible story. Dr. Abby Grace Drake from Harvard Medical School developed precise techniques for measuring cranial changes in ancient dogs, and what she found revolutionized our understanding of early human-dog relationships. Ancient dog skulls show dramatic changes from their wolf ancestors, but these changes weren't random. They followed specific patterns that suggest our ancestors were deliberately breeding for traits that enhanced emotional bonding. Larger eye sockets that made expressions more visible and appealing, shortened snouts that created more forward-facing eyes, improving eye contact with humans, modified jaw structures that changed the acoustics of vocalizations, making dog barks and whines more emotionally compelling to human ears. It's as if our ancestors were unconsciously engineering the perfect emotional companions, selecting for dogs that could communicate with us not just through behavior, but through their very appearance. But here's where the bone evidence reveals something that might surprise you about ancient dog intelligence. Dr. Mary Lethlobhair from Trinity College Dublin studied toothwear patterns in ancient dog skulls and made a startling discovery. Many ancient dogs show evidence of using their teeth as tools in ways that wild wolves never do. Where patterns suggest they were helping humans process plant fibers for rope making, cracking nuts with precision that required learned technique, and even participating in hide preparation for clothing and shelter. These weren't just hunting companions. They were skilled craft workers, partners in the complex tasks of survival. The bone density analysis reveals even more incredible adaptations. Ancient dogs developed skeletal structures optimized for specific tasks based on their regional environments. Arctic dogs evolved denser leg bones for pulling sleds across snow. Desert dogs developed lighter, more flexible spines for endurance running in hot climates. Mountain dogs grew broader rib cages for efficient oxygen processing at high altitudes. But perhaps the most moving evidence comes from what Dr. Susan Crockford calls paleopathology, the study of disease and injury in ancient bones. Ancient dog skeletons show clear evidence of what we now recognize as age-related conditions: arthritis, hip dysplasia, dental disease. But here's the remarkable part. Many of these dogs lived well beyond the age where these conditions would have made them burdens rather than assets to their human families. A 9,000-year-old dog skeleton from Alaska shows severe arthritis in all 4 legs, yet lived to an estimated age of 15. Ancient for any dog, but especially one with such debilitating conditions. The only way this dog could have survived was with constant human care. Soft foods, warm shelter, protection from predators, and probably daily assistance with basic mobility. Someone loved this dog enough to become its full-time caregiver for years. Dr. Robert Lucy from the University of Alberta found similar evidence at sites across Siberia. Elderly dogs with conditions that would have required intensive care, living in human settlements where their care would have consumed significant resources but provided no survival advantage to the group. The bone evidence makes it clear these relationships transcended mere utility. This was love. But the skulls reveal one more secret that connects directly to your dog today. Chemical isotope analysis of ancient dog teeth can tell us exactly what these animals were eating, and the results are surprising. Many ancient dogs were eating the same foods as their human companions, not just scraps and leftovers, but the same high-quality proteins, the same carefully prepared meals. They were family members at the dinner table, not scavengers waiting for crumbs. Dr. Hervé Botcherens from the University of Tübingen analysed isotopes from dog teeth spanning 30,000 years and found that the diet quality of dogs improved steadily over time, suggesting that as human-dog bonds deepened, people invested more and more resources in their companions' well-being. Some ancient dogs were eating better than many humans in neighbouring settlements. Their people were literally giving them the food off their own plates. The bone evidence paints a picture of relationships so deep and meaningful that they challenge our assumptions about ancient life. These weren't primitive people struggling for survival who happened to keep useful animals around. These were families who loved their dogs so much they shared their food, their homes, their beds, and ultimately their graves. And here's what might be the most incredible part of all this bone evidence. It suggests that the emotional bond between humans and dogs was just as strong 15,000 years ago as it is today. The same love you feel when you look into your dog's eyes, the same protective instinct when they're hurt, the same grief when you lose them. Our ancestors felt all of this just as deeply. But bones can only tell us so much about these ancient relationships. To truly understand the spiritual and emotional depth of the human-dog bond, we need to look beyond individual skeletons to the sacred burial grounds where entire communities chose to honor their 4-legged family members with rituals that would shape human culture for millennia to come. In the rolling hills of northern Israel, archaeologist Dr. Natalie Monroe discovered something in 2008 that would forever change our understanding of love, loss, and the sacred bond between species, as she carefully excavated a 12,000-year-old Natufian burial site. Her breath caught when she realized what lay before her: the world's first pet cemetery. But this wasn't just any burial ground. What Dr. Monroe found was evidence of grief so profound that an entire community had chosen to honor their dogs with burial rituals previously reserved only for their most beloved human family members. The implications were staggering. These weren't desperate people struggling for survival who happened to live alongside useful animals. These were communities that loved their dogs so deeply they believed their souls deserved the same eternal rest as their own children. Dr. Munro's discovery at Ain Malahar revealed 11 separate dog burials, each one carefully arranged with an attention to detail that spoke of deep emotional attachment. The dogs were positioned in natural sleeping poses, with their paws tucked under their bodies and their heads resting as if they had simply dozed off and never woken up. But here's what made her hands shake as she documented each burial. Many of these dogs were found with grave goods. Jewelry made from shells and bone beads, stone tools placed near their paws, and in one case, a puppy buried with what appeared to be a toy carved from antler. Think about what this means. 12,000 years ago, people were crafting toys for their dogs and believing strongly enough in an afterlife for animals that they sent their companions into eternity with gifts for the journey. Dr. Susan Davis from the University of Arizona studied similar burial sites across the Levant and made a discovery that challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient spirituality. The positioning of dogs in these burials follows specific patterns that mirror human burial practices of the same period. Dogs were oriented to face east toward the rising sun, just like their human family members. They were placed in graves that showed evidence of repeated visitation. Worn paths leading to burial sites, offerings of flowers and food left at gravesides, and most remarkably, evidence that some graves were periodically reopened to add additional grave goods. People were visiting their dogs' graves. They were bringing them gifts. They were mourning them with the same rituals they used for their human loved ones. But the emotional evidence goes even deeper than burial positioning. Dr. Ofer Bar Yosef from Harvard University analyzed soil samples from these ancient dog graves and found something that brought tears to his eyes: chemical traces of what could only be described as funeral feasts, evidence that entire communities gathered at dog burial sites to share meals and honor the life of a beloved companion. Imagine the scene: an ancient village gathering in mourning for a dog that had spent its life protecting their children, helping with their hunts, warming their beds on cold nights, families sharing food and stories, celebrating a life that had touched all of theirs. This wasn't just burial. This was commemoration. This was love made sacred. The discovery that shocked archaeologists the most came from sites in present-day Russia, where Dr. Robert Losey found evidence of something unprecedented in the archaeological record: joint human-dog burials that showed clear evidence of simultaneous death. At the Shamanka II site near Lake Baikal, Losey discovered 7 graves where humans and dogs had been buried together, but analysis revealed that both species had died at the same time, with no evidence of sacrifice or violence. The most likely explanation: these people had chosen to die alongside their beloved companions, either through mutual illness, shared exposure to harsh conditions, or in some cases, what appears to be voluntary death following the loss of a cherished dog. Someone loved their dogs so much that they couldn't imagine existing without them. But perhaps the most incredible discovery came from a site in Czech Republic, where archaeologist Dr. Jiří Svoboda uncovered what he calls the Pompeii of prehistoric dog love. The Dolní Věstonice burial site preserved a moment frozen in time, a human burial where the deceased was found with their hand resting on the chest of a dog, both of them covered in red ochre, a pigment reserved for the most sacred ritual purposes. Chemical analysis revealed that both the human and dog had matching ochre handprints on their bodies, suggesting that the living members of the community had literally painted both the deceased person and their dog with the same ceremonial markings before burial. In death, there was no distinction between human and animal. They were family, equal in their worthiness of sacred ritual and eternal rest. Dr. Michigamonprey's analysis of these painted burials revealed something even more extraordinary. The red ochre wasn't just decorative, it was symbolic. This pigment was incredibly precious, requiring extensive trade networks to obtain, and was typically reserved for the most important spiritual ceremonies. Using red ochre on dog burials meant that these communities valued their animal companions highly enough to invest their most precious ritual materials in their eternal journey. But the spiritual significance of these burials extends far beyond individual graves. Dr. Maria Gvozdova from the Institute of Archaeology in Moscow discovered that many Paleolithic sites show evidence of what she calls cemetery districts, specific areas set aside exclusively for dog burials, often positioned between human burial grounds and the main living areas of settlements. The dogs weren't buried as afterthoughts in random locations. They were interred in carefully chosen sacred spaces that honoured their role as bridges between the human world and the wild natural world they had once inhabited. Some sites show evidence of burial practices that continued for generations. The same sacred ground was used for dog burials spanning hundreds of years, suggesting that the tradition of honouring canine companions was passed down through families and communities as a core cultural value. But here's where these ancient burial practices reveal something profound about the spiritual beliefs of our ancestors. Dr. Brian Hayden from Simon Fraser University studied the symbolic elements found in prehistoric dog burials and discovered that many of these graves contain artifacts that suggest belief in an animal afterlife that was not separate from, but integrated with, human spiritual destinations. Dogs were buried with human tools, suggesting they would continue to work alongside their people in whatever realm came next. They were positioned to face the same directions as human graves, indicating they were expected to journey to the same spiritual destinations. Most remarkably, some dog graves show evidence of feeding tubes, hollow reeds or bones placed from the surface down to the burial, through which the living could continue to provide food for their departed companions. These weren't just burial rituals, these were theological statements. Our ancestors believed that the bond between humans and dogs was so sacred that it transcended death itself. The graves tell us that 12,000 years ago, people had already developed complex spiritual beliefs about animal consciousness, animal souls, and the eternal nature of love between species. Dr. Pat Shipman's analysis of these burial patterns across multiple continents revealed something that gives us chills. The practice of sacred dog burial emerged independently in widely separated human populations during roughly the same time period. From the Middle East to Siberia to North America, communities that had no contact with each other were simultaneously developing the belief that dogs deserved the same sacred burial rites as humans. It was as if the spiritual bond between our species was so fundamental that recognizing it was inevitable wherever humans and dogs lived together. But perhaps the most moving evidence comes from sites where archaeologists found what can only be described as family cemeteries, burial grounds where generations of humans and dogs were interred together over centuries. At the Costa site in Illinois, researchers discovered burial grounds spanning 3,000 years where human and dog graves were intermixed without distinction. Children buried beside puppies, elderly humans next to aged hunting dogs, warriors accompanied by their loyal companions into whatever battles awaited beyond death. Looking at these ancient cemeteries, you realize that the relationship between humans and dogs had evolved far beyond simple domestication or even companionship. This had become a spiritual partnership. a sacred alliance that our ancestors believed would continue into eternity. And here's what makes these discoveries so profound. They reveal that the love you feel for your dog today, the grief you experience when you lose them, the sense that they're not just animals but genuine family members with souls and personalities, these feelings aren't modern sentimentality. They're ancient truths, recognized and honored by our ancestors thousands of years ago. But as moving as these burial sites are, they're only part of the story. Because while some communities were honoring their dogs in death, others were putting them to work in ways that would transform human civilization itself. The story of how dogs became humanity's first employees and how that partnership built the foundation for everything we call progress is about to reveal the true extent of what our ancestors achieved together. 25,000 years ago, a hunting party stood at the edge of what would become one of the most successful ambushes in prehistoric history. But this wasn't just humans against a massive woolly mammoth. This was the world's first cross-species military operation, and it was about to prove that cooperation could literally move mountains of meat. Dr. Pat Shipman spent 15 years analysing kill sites across Ice Age Europe, and what she discovered revolutionised our understanding of how humans conquered the most dangerous period in our planet's history, because the evidence she found suggests that humans didn't just survive the Ice Age, they dominated it, and they did it with four-legged partners that turned them into the most efficient predators Earth had ever seen. The Schöningen site in Germany preserves what Dr. Hartmut Thiem calls the world's oldest hunting technology, but it's not what you might expect. Alongside the famous wooden spears that date back 400,000 years, archaeologists found something that changes everything we thought we knew about human hunting capabilities. Paw prints, hundreds of them, preserved in ancient mud alongside human footprints, creating a timeline of cooperation that spans millennia. But here's where the story becomes absolutely incredible. These weren't random encounters between humans and wolves. Dr. Shipman's analysis reveals evidence of coordinated hunting strategies so sophisticated that they wouldn't look out of place in a modern military manual. Picture the scene: a herd of massive bison, each one weighing over a ton, grazing in a valley surrounded by steep cliffs. For humans alone, these animals would be virtually impossible to hunt. They're faster than humans, stronger than humans, and their horns can kill with a single swipe. But humans weren't alone. Archaeological evidence from the Olson Chubbuck site in Colorado shows how human wolf hunting teams developed tactics that were absolutely ingenious. Dr. Joe Ben Wheat's excavation revealed a bison kill site where over 190 animals have been driven off a cliff in a single, perfectly coordinated hunt. The positioning of the bones tells the story. Wolves positioned themselves upwind to drive the herd toward the cliff edge, while humans waited in concealed positions along the escape routes. When the moment was right, both species moved simultaneously, creating a pincer movement that gave the bison nowhere to run except over the precipice. This wasn't luck. This was military-grade tactical planning between two species that had learned to think as one unit. Dr. Curtis Marion from Arizona State University studied similar kill sites across 3 continents and found evidence that these cooperative hunting strategies spread rapidly across human populations. Within just a few thousand years, sites from Spain to Siberia show identical tactical approaches, suggesting that successful hunting techniques were being shared and refined across vast distances. But the most mind-blowing discovery came when researchers realized the true scale of what these human dog hunting teams were accomplishing. Dr. Mary Steiner from the University of Arizona analyzed prey remains from Mediterranean caves and found something that defied explanation. During the period of human-dog cooperation, kill sites show evidence of humans successfully hunting prey. that was literally impossible for them to catch without canine assistance. We're talking about fleet-footed gazelles that can outrun any human, cave bears that weigh 800 pounds and can kill a person with one swipe, and most incredibly, evidence of humans successfully hunting pack predators like hyenas and even other wolves. Think about what this means. Humans had become so efficient at cooperative hunting that they were actively competing with and winning against nature's most successful predators. But here's where the hunting partnership reveals something that might change how you think about intelligence itself. Dr. Brian Hare's research at Duke University discovered that the cognitive demands of coordinated hunting created evolutionary pressure that enhanced intelligence in both species. Humans had to develop complex communication systems to coordinate with wolves, while wolves had to learn to interpret human signals and intentions. Archaeological evidence supports this cognitive arms race. Tool complexity at sites with dog remains shows dramatic advancement compared to sites without dogs. Humans living with canine partners were developing more sophisticated weapons, more complex shelters, and most remarkably, the first evidence of what we now recognize as strategic planning. Cave paintings from Lascaux and Chauvet show hunting scenes that aren't just artistic expressions, they're tactical diagrams. Humans were literally drawing battle plans, showing wolf and human positions during hunts, marking escape routes and kill zones with the precision of military strategists. Your ancestors weren't just hunters, they were generals, commanding multi-species armies in a war against extinction. But the partnership created advantages that went far beyond just bringing down bigger prey. Dr. Daniel Fisher from the University of Michigan made a discovery that stunned the archaeological community. At mammoth kill sites in Siberia, he found evidence of meat processing and storage techniques that would have been impossible without canine assistance. The logistics are staggering. A single adult mammoth provides about 4,000 pounds of meat, enough to feed a small human band for months, but only if it can be properly processed and preserved before spoilage. Dogs solved this problem in ways that were absolutely ingenious. Their superior sense of smell allowed them to identify the freshest cuts for immediate consumption and detect early signs of spoilage before humans could perceive them. But more importantly, they could guard stored meat from scavengers while humans worked on processing the massive carcass. Evidence from Siberian sites shows that human dog teams developed techniques for preserving mammoth meat through entire winter seasons, basically creating the world's first refrigeration systems using permafrost caves that dogs helped locate and defend. The efficiency gains were enormous. Dr. John Hoffaker from the University of Colorado calculated that human populations with dog partnerships could extract nearly 40% more nutrition from large kills compared to humans working alone. That's the difference between thriving and barely surviving during the Ice Age. But perhaps the most incredible aspect of these hunting partnerships was how they transformed human migration patterns. Dr. Ted Goebel from Texas A&M University studied the spread of human populations during the late Pleistocene and found something remarkable. The routes that humans took to colonize new territories consistently follow corridors where large game animals were abundant. Routes that would have been impossible to navigate safely without the early warning systems and hunting assistance that dogs provided. Humans didn't just wander randomly across continents hoping to find food. They followed predictable migration routes of large herbivores, essentially creating a mobile hunting economy that could sustain them across thousands of miles of harsh terrain. Dogs made humans nomadic super-predators. The Bering Land Bridge that connected Asia to North America was traversed by human dog teams, following mammoth herds across a landscape so hostile that it would have been lethal for humans alone. Dogs could detect storms hours before they hit, locate fresh water sources under snow, and most critically track prey across vast distances where getting lost meant certain death. But here's where the hunting evidence reveals something profound about the evolution of human consciousness. Dr. Stephen Mython from the University of Reading analysed the cognitive complexity required for the hunting strategies found at late Paleolithic sites, and concluded that coordinating with dogs required humans to develop what he calls social intelligence, the ability to understand and predict the thoughts and behaviours of another species. This wasn't just communication. This was empathy across species lines, the cognitive foundation for every cooperative relationship humans would ever develop. Archaeological evidence shows that human brain size actually increased during the period of intensive human-dog cooperation, suggesting that the mental demands of cross-species teamwork literally reshaped human evolution. But the hunting partnership also created something entirely unprecedented in the animal kingdom. The first evidence of what we now recognize as strategic thinking about the future. Sites across Europe show evidence of humans creating what archaeologists call hunting caches, hidden stockpiles of weapons and tools positioned along known migration routes. These weren't random storage sites. They were strategic depots that required months of planning and preparation, positioned with mathematical precision to support hunting operations across seasonal migration cycles. Dogs were essential to this system. Their spatial memory and territorial instincts allowed them to relocate these hidden caches even after months of absence, essentially creating a GPS system that guided human hunting parties across vast territories. Some of these cache networks spanned hundreds of miles, suggesting that human-dog teams were operating with a level of strategic sophistication that rivals modern military logistics. The most incredible discovery came from sites in France, where archaeologists found evidence of what can only be described as hunting schools, locations where experienced human-dog teams trained younger members of both species in complex hunting techniques, where patterns on practice spears deliberately created mock ambush sites, and most remarkably, evidence of reward systems where successful trainees, both human and canine, received special cuts of meat during training exercises. Our ancestors weren't just hunting for survival. They were building educational institutions, developing training curricula, and creating meritocracy systems that rewarded excellence in cross-species cooperation. But as successful as these Ice Age hunting partnerships were, they were about to face their greatest challenge. Because the world was warming, the massive herds were disappearing, and humans and dogs would need to completely reinvent their relationship to survive in a radically different environment. The story of how they adapted to this catastrophic change would determine whether their partnership could survive the transition from hunters to something entirely new. 12,000 years ago, when the last mammoths finally disappeared from most of the Earth and the great ice sheets began their retreat, humans and their dog partners faced an existential crisis that would either destroy their partnership or transform it into something entirely unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. The massive herds that had sustained them for millennia were vanishing. The hunting strategies that had made them super predators were suddenly useless, and for the first time since Luna's descendants began their partnership with humans, both species had to completely reinvent what it meant to survive together. What emerged from this crisis would shock even Luna herself. Her great-great-grandchildren were about to become the most physically diverse single species the planet had ever produced. Dr. Gregor Larson from Oxford University spent a decade tracing the genetic origins of dog breeds, and what he discovered reads like science fiction. Starting from wolves that were essentially identical across continents, humans somehow created animals so different from each other that a Chihuahua and a Great Dane seem like they belong to entirely different planets. But here's the mind-blowing part. All of this incredible diversity emerged in just 8,000 years. That's lightning speed in evolutionary terms, suggesting that the environmental pressures of post-Ice Age survival triggered the most rapid physical evolution ever documented in any mammalian species. The earliest evidence of intentional breed development comes from a site that Dr. Angela Perry calls the birthplace of dog specialization, the Starcar settlement in northern England dating to 9,000 years ago. At Starcar, archaeologists found something that revolutionized our understanding of early human innovation. Dog skeletons showing 3 distinct body types, all living in the same settlement at the same time, but clearly bred for completely different purposes. The first type, massive bear-like dogs with incredibly thick bones and powerful jaws. These weren't hunters. They were the world's first security systems, bred specifically to guard settlements from the dangerous predators that still roamed post-Ice Age Europe. The second type looked almost comically different. Small, agile dogs with elongated limbs and evidence of incredibly keen eyesight. Analysis of their inner ear structure shows they were bred for one specific purpose: detecting the tiny movements and sounds of small game that had become crucial for survival as large prey disappeared. But it's the third type that really shows the genius of early dog breeders. Dr. Mietje Germonprey's analysis revealed dogs with skeletal modifications that seem almost impossible: extended spinal columns, modified rib cages, and most remarkably, evidence of webbed feet. These dogs were bred for swimming, for retrieving waterfowl from lakes and rivers that had formed as the ice melted. Think about what this means. 9,000 years ago, humans were practicing genetic engineering with such precision that they could modify bone structure, sensory capabilities, and even specific anatomical features like webbed feet. They were literally sculpting life itself. But the most incredible discovery came from sites in what is now Turkey, where Dr. Benjamin Arbuckle found evidence of the world's first designer dogs. Animals bred not for survival, but for pure aesthetic appeal. The Çatalhöyük site, dating to 8,000 years ago, contained dog remains that served no obvious practical purpose. These dogs were too small for hunting, too delicate for guarding, and show evidence of being fed premium diets, despite contributing nothing to the community's survival. Archaeological evidence suggests these dogs were bred specifically to be beautiful, to be companions, to be living art that brought joy to their human families during a period when joy was in short supply. Our ancestors were breeding dogs for happiness. 8,000 years ago, in one of the harshest periods of human history, people were investing precious resources in creating animals whose only job was to make life more pleasant. Dr. Laurent France from Queen Mary University of London discovered that this aesthetic breeding wasn't random experimentation. Chemical analysis of ancient dog teeth shows that these companion breeds were eating the same high-quality foods as human children, suggesting they held a status in the family hierarchy that was essentially equivalent to offspring. But here's where the breed development gets absolutely fascinating from a genetic perspective. The rapid diversification of dog breeds created what geneticists call founder effects, on a scale never seen before. Dr. Heidi Parker's research at the National Human Genome Research Institute revealed that many ancient breed lineages trace back to just a handful of individual dogs whose unique characteristics became the foundation for entire populations. This means that somewhere around 7,000 years ago, there was probably one single female dog whose unusual coat pattern became the genetic foundation for every spotted dog breed that exists today. Another individual whose small size became the ancestor of all toy breeds. Another whose protective instincts launched the lineage of every guard dog breed in history. These weren't just breeding programs. These were genetic bottlenecks that channel the incredible diversity potential of the domestic dog genome through the characteristics of individual animals that early humans recognized as special. But the most stunning discovery about ancient breed development came from Dr. Adam Boyko's analysis of DNA from archaeological sites across 5 continents. What he found was that identical breed types were emerging independently in widely separated human populations during roughly the same time period. Arctic peoples were developing sled dogs at the same time that desert peoples were creating heat-adapted hunting dogs, despite having no contact with each other. It was as if humans had an instinctive understanding of the genetic potential hidden within their canine partners, and given similar environmental pressures, they consistently unlock the same solutions. The archaeological record shows that by 6,000 years ago, humans had successfully created dog breeds adapted to virtually every environment on Earth. Arctic breeds with double coats and modified metabolism for extreme cold, desert breeds with efficient cooling systems and minimal water requirements, mountain breeds with enhanced lung capacity and sure footing, aquatic breeds with water-resistant coats and swimming adaptations. Dr. Peter Savalanen's genetic mapping project revealed something that sounds impossible. Humans had essentially turned dogs into a Swiss Army knife of biological adaptation, creating living tools perfectly suited for survival in environments that would have been lethal for humans alone. But perhaps the most incredible aspect of ancient breed development was how it reflected the psychology and values of the cultures that created them. Dr. Darcy Morey's analysis of burial sites associated with different dog breeds revealed distinct cultural patterns. Warrior societies consistently developed larger, more aggressive breeds. Trading communities bred dogs for stamina and load-carrying capacity. Settled agricultural communities created smaller, more social breeds that could integrate into complex family structures. Dogs weren't just adapting to environments, they were adapting to human personalities, human values, human dreams of what the perfect companion should be. The Basenji, developed in Central Africa, was bred to hunt silently, literally genetically modified to bark less frequently than other dogs. The ancient prototype of the Saluki was bred in the Middle East for pure speed, creating what may have been the world's first racing dogs. Early Spitz breeds in Scandinavia were bred for intelligence and independence, capable of making decisions without human guidance during long hunting expeditions. Each breed was essentially a genetic love letter, encoding the hopes and needs of the culture that created it. But here's where the story takes a somewhat darker turn that connects directly to issues we're still dealing with today. Dr. Gregor Larsson's genetic analysis revealed that the rapid breed development of the post-Ice Age period created the first evidence of what we now recognize as genetic health problems. The same intensive breeding that created such incredible diversity also began producing the hereditary issues that plague many modern dog breeds. Ancient dog skeletons from specialized breeding programs show early evidence of hip dysplasia in large breeds, breathing difficulties in flat-faced breeds, and neurological issues in breeds selected for extreme behavioral traits. Our ancestors had discovered the power of genetic manipulation, but they were also learning its dangers, lessons that many modern breeders have unfortunately forgotten. The most moving discovery came from a site in ancient Mesopotamia, where archaeologists found evidence of what appears to be the world's first veterinary practices specifically designed to address breed-related health issues. Clay tablets from 4,000 years ago contain what can only be described as medical procedures for treating the health problems that resulted from intensive breeding, instructions for setting bones in large dogs prone to fractures, breathing treatments for flat-faced breeds, and most remarkably surgical techniques for correcting vision problems in breeds that had been selected for extreme eye characteristics. Ancient breeders weren't just creating diversity, they were taking responsibility for the consequences of their genetic experiments. But the true legacy of these first breeds goes far beyond their physical characteristics. What early humans had accomplished was nothing short of miraculous. They had proven that love and intention could reshape life itself, that cooperation between species could unlock potential that neither could achieve alone. Looking at the archaeological evidence, you realize that every dog breed that exists today is essentially a 10,000-year-old love story, a genetic poem written by our ancestors to express their dreams of the perfect partnership. Yet as magnificent as these ancient breed achievements were, they were only the beginning. Because as humans began settling into permanent communities and developing agriculture, their relationship with dogs would need to evolve once again. The story of how these specialized breeds adapted to become partners in humanity's greatest experiment, civilization itself, reveals innovations that would change both species forever. Throughout the frozen caves of Lascaux, painted across the volcanic cliffs of Tassili Naja, and etched into the granite walls of Siberian gorges, one image appears again and again with a frequency that puzzled archaeologists for decades. Humans and dogs walking side by side, not as master and servant, but as equals sharing a sacred space between the earthly world and the realm of the divine. Dr. Jean Claude, the world's leading expert on Paleolithic cave art, made a discovery in 1994 that would fundamentally change our understanding of ancient spirituality. Deep within the Chauvet cave in France, dating back 32,000 years, he found something that took his breath away. The oldest known religious artwork depicting humans and dogs as spiritual partners, hunting together not just in this world, but in the afterlife itself. This wasn't just art. This was theology, and it revealed that the bond between humans and dogs had become so profound that our ancestors believed it was literally sacred, blessed by the gods and destined to continue beyond death. The implications were staggering. 32,000 years ago, at the very dawn of human artistic expression, people were already developing complex religious beliefs about the spiritual significance of their relationship with dogs. Dr. David Lewis Williams from the University of Witwatersrand studied shamanic art traditions across 6 continents and discovered something that sent chills down his spine. In culture after culture, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, humans consistently depicted dogs as spiritual guides, beings capable of travelling between the world of the living and the world of the dead. But here's where the spiritual evidence becomes absolutely incredible. The Göbekli Tepe site in Turkey, built 11,500 years ago and predating Stonehenge by 6,000 years, contains what Dr. Klaus Schmidt called the world's first cathedral. Carved into its massive stone pillars are hundreds of animal figures, but one species appears more frequently than any other. Dogs, depicted not as domestic animals, but as divine messengers with supernatural powers. Think about what this means. When humans built their first monumental religious architecture, when they invested enormous effort into creating sacred spaces that would endure for millennia, they chose to honor dogs as divine beings worthy of worship alongside the gods themselves. Archaeological evidence from shamanic burial sites across Siberia reveals practices that would profoundly move you. Dr. Natasha Reynolds from Cambridge University discovered graves where shamans, the spiritual leaders of their communities, were buried with elaborate dog headdresses, canine tooth necklaces, and most remarkably, actual dogs positioned to guide them through the afterlife. But these weren't just any dogs. Chemical analysis of the remains shows these were specially selected animals that had been fed sacred foods and treated with reverence throughout their lives. They were living gods, prepared from birth for their ultimate role as psychopomps. guides for human souls traveling to the spirit world. The spiritual practices get even more incredible when you examine the role of dogs in shamanic healing ceremonies. Dr. Mircea Eliade's comprehensive study of world shamanism revealed that across cultures from the Arctic to the Amazon, shamans consistently used dogs as intermediaries in healing rituals. Dogs were believed to possess the ability to see spiritual illnesses that were invisible to humans, to track lost souls across the boundaries between worlds, and to protect shamans during dangerous spiritual journeys. But perhaps the most moving evidence comes from the way ancient cultures incorporated dogs into their creation myths. The Inuit people tell stories of the first dog being created by the gods, specifically to be humanity's companion during the long darkness of winter. Ancient Egyptian texts describe dogs as the guardians of the underworld, responsible for guiding human souls safely through the trials of death. Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime stories credit dogs with teaching humans the secrets of fire, shelter, and survival. These weren't just stories. They were theological statements about the fundamental importance of the human-dog relationship to the survival and spiritual development of our species. Dr. Maria Tatar from Harvard University analyzed dog-related mythology from over 200 cultures and found something that defies coincidence. Despite having no contact with each other, cultures around the world consistently developed beliefs that dogs were created by divine forces specifically to be humanity's spiritual partners. The consistency is stunning, from Norse mythology's Garm guarding the gates of hell, to ancient Greece's Cerberus protecting the underworld, to the Aztec belief in dogs guiding souls across the river of death. Humanity seems to have an instinctive understanding that dogs serve as bridges between the physical and spiritual realms. But the archaeological evidence reveals that these weren't just abstract beliefs. They had profound practical implications for how ancient societies treated their canine companions. At the Skateholm site in Sweden, Dr. Lars Larsson discovered burials that revolutionized our understanding of prehistoric spirituality. Dogs were interred with the same grave goods as human shamans: crystal pendants, bone flutes, carved figurines, and most remarkably, evidence of mummification techniques that preserve their bodies for the spiritual journey ahead. These dogs weren't just beloved pets. They were ordained clergy, spiritual practitioners whose souls were considered essential for the religious well-being of their communities. The cave paintings at Lascaux reveal even more incredible details about ancient spiritual practices. Dr. Norbert Ojula's analysis of the artwork shows humans and dogs participating together in what can only be described as religious ceremonies, ritualistic hunts that weren't about obtaining food, but about maintaining spiritual balance between the human world and the natural world. The positioning is too deliberate to be coincidental. Humans and dogs are depicted in formation patterns that mirror known shamanic practices, suggesting that 17,000 years ago, people were already conducting elaborate spiritual ceremonies that required the active participation of their canine partners. But here's where the spiritual evidence reveals something that might change how you think about your own dog's behavior. Dr. Alexandra Horowitz from Barnard College studied the sensory capabilities that made dogs such powerful spiritual partners and discovered that dogs can detect changes in electromagnetic fields, infrasound vibrations, and chemical signatures that are completely imperceptible to humans. In other words, the abilities that made ancient peoples believe dogs could see spirits and communicate with the divine aren't supernatural. They're real, scientifically measurable sensory capabilities that we're only now beginning to understand. Your dog's apparent ability to sense things you can't see, to know when storms are coming hours before they arrive, to detect illnesses before symptoms appear. These aren't mystical powers. They're evolutionary adaptations that made dogs ideal partners for shamanic practices that required sensitivity to subtle environmental changes. The spiritual practices also had profound genetic implications that shaped dog evolution in unexpected ways. Dr. Jennifer Leonard from the Natural History Museum analysed DNA from dogs found in religious burial contexts and discovered that animals selected for spiritual roles consistently showed genetic markers associated with enhanced sensory processing and reduced aggression responses. Ancient priests were essentially breeding dogs for heightened spiritual sensitivity, creating lineages of animals that were genetically optimized for religious practices that required calm temperament and supernatural perceptual abilities. But the most incredible discovery about ancient dog spirituality came from sites in Peru where Dr. Sonia Guillen found evidence of what can only be described as canine monasteries, specialized religious complexes where dogs were raised, trained and cared for exclusively for spiritual purposes. These weren't breeding facilities. They were theological schools where dogs received religious education, learning specific behaviors and responses that would make them effective partners in shamanic ceremonies. Archaeological evidence shows that these canine monasteries operated continuously for over 2,000 years, suggesting that training dogs for spiritual roles was considered a sacred profession that required generational expertise. The religious artifacts found at these sites include what appear to be training materials, carved figurines showing dogs in ceremonial positions, bone whistles tuned to frequencies that provoke specific responses in canines, and most remarkably, clay tablets, with what can only be described as instruction manuals for spiritual dog training. Ancient peoples were developing sophisticated educational curricula for their religious dogs, treating spiritual partnership as a learnable skill that required formal instruction and ongoing practice. But perhaps the most moving aspect of ancient dog spirituality was how it reflected humanity's deep understanding of the emotional and psychological benefits of interspecies companionship. Dr. James Seppel from the University of Pennsylvania studied the therapeutic aspects of ancient dog-human spiritual practices and found that rituals involving dogs consistently focused on healing emotional trauma, providing comfort during grief, and maintaining psychological stability during difficult transitions. Ancient shamans understood something that modern psychology is only now rediscovering, that the bond with dogs provides profound therapeutic benefits that can literally heal psychological wounds and restore emotional balance. The cave paintings show dogs comforting grieving humans, participating in healing ceremonies, and most beautifully, simply being present during moments of human vulnerability and pain. Our ancestors didn't just worship dogs as gods. They understood them as healers, therapists, and emotional support providers whose presence could restore hope during humanity's darkest moments. As we've seen, the spiritual partnership between humans and dogs created theological frameworks that shaped entire civilizations. But this sacred bond was about to face its greatest test as humans began to spread across the globe, taking their four-legged spiritual partners into environments so hostile that survival would require every divine blessing they could find. The story of how dogs and humans conquered the world together reveals migrations so epic they seem almost mythological, yet the archaeological evidence proves they really happened. 15,000 years ago, a small band of humans and dogs stood at the edge of what would become the most dangerous journey in the history of either species, a crossing into an unknown land across a bridge of ice that existed for only a few thousand years before vanishing forever beneath the waves. This wasn't just migration, this was the ultimate test of whether the partnership between humans and dogs was strong enough to literally conquer the world. Dr. Jennifer Raff from the University of Kansas spent a decade analyzing ancient DNA from both sides of the Bering Land Bridge, and what she discovered reads like an epic adventure novel. The genetic evidence reveals that dogs didn't just accompany humans to the Americas. They may have actually arrived first, scouting the route and establishing the survival strategies that made human colonization possible. Think about the courage this required. These early explorers were walking into a landscape more hostile than anything their species had ever encountered. Endless tundra where temperatures dropped to 60 degrees below zero, predators that had never seen humans and felt no fear, and absolutely no guarantee that food, water, or shelter would be available on the other side. But they had something that made the impossible merely difficult: each other. The archaeological evidence from Bluefish Caves in Canada, dating to 24,000 years ago, preserves what Dr. Lauriane Bourgeon calls humanity's greatest migration story. Cut marks on ancient horse bones show that humans were processing meat in the Americas thousands of years earlier than previously thought. But the real revelation came from the paw prints preserved alongside human footprints in the cave sediments. Dogs and humans weren't just travelling together. They were working together with a level of coordination that allowed them to survive in conditions that should have killed them both. Dr. Ben Potter from the University of Alaska analysed migration routes across Beringia and discovered something that will give you chills. The paths that humans and dogs took across the land bridge weren't random wandering. They followed incredibly sophisticated navigation strategies that suggest advanced planning and environmental knowledge that took generations to develop. These early explorers had created what amounts to the world's first GPS system, using dogs' superior sense of smell to detect distant water sources, their ability to read weather patterns to avoid deadly storms, and their territorial instincts to map safe routes across thousands of miles of unmapped wilderness. But here's where the migration story becomes absolutely incredible from a survival perspective. Dr. Angela Perry's analysis of archaeological sites along the migration route reveals evidence of what she calls leapfrog colonization, a strategy where advanced teams of humans and dogs would establish supply caches and shelter sites, then signal back to larger groups about safe routes and resource availability. Dogs weren't just companions on this journey. They were reconnaissance specialists, advanced scouts, and long-distance communication systems all rolled into one. The genetic evidence tells us that multiple waves of migration occurred over thousands of years, with each wave learning from the successes and failures of those who came before. Dr. Ripan Malhi from the University of Illinois discovered that the dogs who survived the journey carried specific genetic adaptations that made them incredibly efficient at surviving in extreme conditions. These weren't just any dogs. They were specially adapted Arctic breeds with enhanced metabolism for processing fat-rich diets, modified circulation systems for conserving heat, and most remarkably, behavioral traits that made them naturally inclined to work in coordinated teams during extended survival situations. But the migration story gets even more amazing when you consider the distances involved. Dr. John Hoffaker calculated that the complete colonization of the Americas, from Alaska to the southern tip of Chile, happened in less than 3,000 years. That means humans and dogs were covering an average of nearly 10 miles per year in their expansion across 2 entire continents, while simultaneously adapting to radically different climates, learning to hunt completely new prey species, and establishing permanent settlements in dozens of different environments. This wasn't just migration. This was the most successful biological invasion in the history of complex life on Earth. The archaeological evidence from Monteverde in Chile, dating to 14,500 years ago, shows that by the time humans reached the southern tip of South America, they had already developed sophisticated technologies specifically designed for human-dog cooperation in extreme environments. Specialized sleds for transporting supplies across snow and ice, with harness systems clearly designed for dogs. Shelter designs that incorporated specific spaces for keeping dogs warm and healthy during long winters. Most remarkably, evidence of breeding programs designed to maintain genetic diversity in dog populations during long-distance migrations. These weren't desperate refugees fleeing across unknown territory. These were organized expeditions with advanced logistics, planned breeding programs, and survival technologies that required generations of experience to perfect. But perhaps the most incredible aspect of the Great Migration was how it transformed both species in ways that are still visible today. Dr. Peter Savalanen's genetic mapping project revealed that the dogs who completed the journey to the Americas underwent rapid evolutionary changes that optimized them for their new environments. Desert-adapted breeds with enhanced heat tolerance emerged in the southwest. Cold-adapted breeds with improved fat processing developed in the Arctic. High-altitude breeds with enhanced oxygen processing appeared in mountain regions. The migration didn't just spread dogs across the globe, it created entirely new varieties of dogs, each one perfectly adapted to specific environmental niches that their ancestors had never encountered. And the humans changed too. Dr. Dennis O'Rourke from the University of Utah discovered that human populations who migrated with dogs developed genetic adaptations that enhanced their ability to work cooperatively with other species, modifications to neural pathways that improved cross-species communication, enhanced pattern recognition for reading animal behavior, and most remarkably, increased oxytocin production that strengthened emotional bonding with non-human partners. The Great Migration literally rewired human brains to be better partners for dogs, while simultaneously rewiring dog brains to be better partners for humans. But here's where the migration evidence reveals something that connects directly to your modern relationship with dogs. Dr. Bridget von Holt's genetic analysis shows that every dog in the Americas today, from Chihuahuas to Canadian Eskimo dogs, traces back to the original migration populations that crossed the Bering Land Bridge. This means that your dog, regardless of its breed or size, carries within its DNA the genetic memory of the most epic journey in the history of life on Earth. Every time your dog shows incredible endurance on long walks, demonstrates uncanny navigation abilities, or displays that deep instinct to work as part of a team, they're channeling genetic adaptations that were forged during humanity's greatest adventure. The island-hopping evidence from the Pacific reveals an even more incredible story of human-dog cooperation during migration. Dr. Matthew Spriggs from Australian National University discovered that humans and dogs successfully colonized islands across the Pacific Ocean, using navigation techniques so sophisticated that they rival modern maritime technology. These weren't accidental discoveries. They were planned expeditions that required precise knowledge of ocean currents, weather patterns, and seasonal timing. Dogs played crucial roles in these oceanic migrations, serving as early warning systems for storms, helping to locate fresh water on new islands, and most remarkably, participating in the complex navigation techniques that allowed Polynesian navigators to find tiny islands across thousands of miles of open ocean. Archaeological evidence from Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand shows that dogs arrived with the first human colonists, suggesting that these oceanic migrations were always conceived as joint human-dog enterprises, rather than human expeditions that happened to include dogs. But the most moving evidence of the Great Migration comes from burial sites found along the major migration routes. Dr. Robert Lucy discovered graves spanning thousands of miles where humans who died during the journey were buried with their dog companions, positioned to face the direction of travel, as if they were prepared to continue the journey together in the afterlife. These weren't just practical partnerships. They were emotional bonds so strong that people facing their own mortality chose to ensure that their loyal companions would be with them for whatever came next. The sheer scale of what human-dog teams accomplished during these migrations is almost impossible to comprehend. They successfully colonized every habitable continent on Earth, adapted to every climate from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest, and established permanent settlements in environments ranging from desert islands to high mountain valleys. But perhaps most remarkably, they did it all while maintaining the emotional bonds and cooperative relationships that had made the partnership possible in the first place. Looking at the migration evidence, you realize that the relationship between humans and dogs isn't just one of the most successful partnerships in biological history, it's also one of the most romantic. These are love stories written across continents, adventures shared across generations, loyalty that endured through the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Yet even as these epic migrations were reshaping the world, the partnership between humans and dogs was about to face an entirely different kind of challenge. Because success, it turns out, creates its own problems, and the story of what happened when human-dog teams became so successful that they started making mistakes that still haunt us today, reveals lessons about love, responsibility, and the unintended consequences of getting exactly what you think you want. Success, it turns out, can be its own worst enemy. By 8,000 years ago, humans and dogs had become so successful at working together that they began making the same tragic mistakes we're still making today. Mistakes that would create suffering that continues to echo through every kennel club and puppy mill in the modern world. Dr. Gregor Larsson's genetic analysis of ancient dog remains revealed something that should serve as a warning to every dog lover today. Starting around 6000 BCE, archaeological sites begin showing evidence of the world's first genetic bottlenecks in domestic dog populations, the moment when human desire for perfection began destroying the very diversity that had made dogs so successful. The story begins in ancient Mesopotamia, where prosperity from early agriculture allowed humans to start breeding dogs not for survival, but for status. And that's when everything started going wrong. At the Royal Cemetery of Ur, dating to 2600 BCE, archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley discovered something that made him deeply uncomfortable. The remains of dozens of dogs that had clearly been bred for extreme characteristics that compromised their health. Elongated skulls that caused breathing problems, shortened legs that created spinal issues, and most disturbing evidence of dogs with genetic conditions that would have made their lives painful, but their appearance exotic to wealthy owners. These weren't accidents. They were deliberate genetic experiments conducted by people who had forgotten that dogs were partners, not accessories. Dr. Heidi Parker's research at the National Human Genome Research Institute revealed that many genetic health problems plaguing modern dog breeds actually trace back to these ancient breeding mistakes. Hip dysplasia in large breeds, breathing difficulties in flat-faced dogs, neurological issues in designer varieties. We've been repeating the same errors for over 4,000 years. But here's what makes these ancient mistakes so heartbreaking. The people making them had access to healthier alternatives that they deliberately chose to ignore. Archaeological evidence from the same time period shows that working dog populations maintained incredible genetic diversity and robust health. Farm dogs, hunting dogs, and sled dogs continued to be bred for function rather than form, and their skeletal remains show none of the genetic problems that plagued their aristocratic cousins. The healthy dogs were right there. Ancient breeders could see the difference. But status and fashion won out over the well-being of the animals they claimed to love. Dr. Angela Perry's analysis of ancient Egyptian breeding records, preserved in hieroglyphic texts, reveals the moment when aesthetic preferences began trumping health considerations. Egyptian tomb paintings from the Middle Kingdom show the progression from functional dogs with natural proportions to increasingly exaggerated breeds with elongated necks, shortened legs, and other features that served no purpose except to signal wealth and taste. The texts are brutally honest about the consequences. Ancient Egyptian veterinary papyri from 1800 BCE contain detailed descriptions of genetic health problems and explicit warnings about breeding practices that create these conditions. The knowledge was there, the warnings were clear, but fashion prevailed over science. Sound familiar? The most tragic example comes from ancient Rome, where Dr. Michael McKinnon's analysis of dog remains from Pompeii revealed a breeding culture that prioritized novelty over everything else. Roman authors like Columella wrote extensively about dog breeding, and their texts read like modern puppy mill catalogues, endless descriptions of rare varieties, exotic colours, and unusual sizes, with almost no mention of health, temperament, or functionality. The dogs found in Pompeii's ruins tell the story. Many show evidence of severe genetic disorders that would have caused chronic pain throughout their lives, spinal deformities, joint problems, dental issues, and most heartbreaking evidence of puppies that died from genetic conditions that could have been prevented with responsible breeding practices. But here's what's even more disturbing. The Romans knew better. Dr. Jill Cassid from the University of Wisconsin discovered Roman texts that explicitly criticize irresponsible breeding practices and warn about the consequences of prioritizing appearance over health. Varro's agricultural writings from 50 BCE contain detailed guidelines for responsible dog breeding that wouldn't be out of place in a modern veterinary textbook. The knowledge existed. The warnings were clear. But the market for exotic dogs was too profitable to ignore. This pattern repeated across ancient civilizations with depressing consistency. In ancient China, Dr. Stanley Olson's analysis of dog remains from Han Dynasty sites shows the same progression from healthy working dogs to increasingly problematic ornamental breeds. Chinese breeding records from 200 CE describe dogs so small they could barely breathe, so flat-faced they couldn't eat properly, and so inbred they suffered from neurological conditions that made normal behavior impossible. Yet Chinese agricultural texts from the same period contain sophisticated understanding of genetics and detailed warnings about the dangers of inbreeding. The emperor's own agricultural advisors were recommending responsible breeding practices, while the imperial court was commissioning increasingly unhealthy designer dogs. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Ancient peoples understood genetics well enough to create healthy, functional dog breeds that thrived for thousands of years, but they also understood it well enough to deliberately create unhealthy dogs for fashion and status. Dr. Darcy Morey's comprehensive analysis of dog burials across different social classes in ancient societies reveals the full scope of this tragedy. Elite burials consistently contain dogs with evidence of genetic health problems, while commoner burials show dogs with robust health and natural proportions. Wealth and status were literally buying genetic suffering. But perhaps the most heartbreaking evidence comes from ancient veterinary practices that developed specifically to address the health problems created by irresponsible breeding. Dr. Louise Meredith's study of ancient medical texts revealed that by 1500 BCE, civilizations across the ancient world had developed sophisticated surgical procedures specifically designed to correct breeding-related deformities. Techniques for opening blocked airways in flat-faced dogs, procedures for correcting spinal problems in elongated breeds, and most tragically, methods for euthanizing puppies born with genetic conditions too severe to survive. Ancient veterinarians were spending enormous effort trying to fix problems that responsible breeding could have prevented entirely. The ancient texts are filled with frustration from veterinarians who understood that they were treating symptoms of a problem that could be solved by changing breeding practices. But economic incentives and social pressures made reform almost impossible. Dr. James Sapel from the University of Pennsylvania discovered papyrus documents from ancient Egypt that read like modern veterinary journals, detailed case studies of genetic disorders, statistical analysis of breeding outcomes, and explicit recommendations for maintaining genetic diversity. Egyptian veterinarians 3,000 years ago understood concepts like hybrid vigor, genetic bottlenecks, and inherited disease risk better than many modern breeders. Yet the same civilization that produced this sophisticated veterinary science continued breeding dogs with known genetic problems because they were fashionable. The most devastating example comes from ancient Persia, where Dr. Richard Meadow found evidence of what can only be described as industrial-scale puppy production. Persian breeding facilities from 500 BCE show all the hallmarks of modern puppy mills: overcrowded conditions, minimal veterinary care, and breeding practices focused entirely on quantity and novelty, rather than health and welfare. Skeletal remains from these facilities tell a horrific story. High rates of genetic disorders, evidence of chronic malnutrition, and most heartbreaking signs of stress-related diseases that indicate these animals lived lives of constant anxiety and discomfort. Ancient Persia had created the world's first puppy mills, complete with all the suffering that modern examples produce. But here's what makes these ancient mistakes so relevant to your life today. Many of the genetic problems we see in modern dog breeds are direct descendants of these ancient breeding disasters. Dr. Elaine Ostrander's research at the National Institutes of Health traced the genetic lineages of modern breed-related health problems and found that many trace back to specific ancient breeding programs that prioritized appearance over health. The breathing problems in modern bulldogs, the spinal issues in dachshunds, the heart conditions in certain toy breeds, these aren't recent developments. They're 4,000-year-old genetic time bombs that we've been perpetuating generation after generation. We inherited these problems from ancient civilizations that made the same mistakes we're making today. But the ancient evidence also provides hope, because it shows that these problems are entirely preventable. Dr. Peter Savalanen's genetic analysis revealed that throughout history, populations of working dogs maintain genetic diversity and robust health by following principles that ancient peoples understood perfectly well: breeding for function rather than form, maintaining large breeding populations, and regularly introducing new genetic material from healthy outcross lines. The solutions existed then. They exist now. The question is whether we'll choose to use them. Looking at the archaeological evidence, you realize that the relationship between humans and dogs has always been a test of human character. When we prioritize their well-being over our preferences, both species thrive. When we prioritize our desires over their health, both species suffer. Ancient peoples failed this test repeatedly, creating genetic problems that continue to cause suffering thousands of years later. But they also passed it repeatedly, creating healthy working partnerships that sustained both species through the greatest challenges in their history. The choice facing modern dog lovers is the same one that faced our ancestors. Will we learn from their mistakes, or will we repeat them? Because the story of how humans and dogs survived their greatest crisis by completely reinventing their relationship one more time shows us that when love and wisdom work together, even the most devastating mistakes can be overcome. While aristocrats across the ancient world were breeding dogs into genetic disasters for fashion, something remarkable was happening in the fields, forests, and mountains where ordinary people lived. The creation of working partnerships so sophisticated that they would become the foundation for every major advancement in human civilization. Dr. Melinda Zeder from the Smithsonian Institution spent 2 decades analysing agricultural sites across the Fertile Crescent, and what she discovered revolutionised our understanding of how human civilization actually developed. The archaeological evidence reveals that dogs weren't just witnesses to the agricultural revolution, they were co-inventors of it. This wasn't the story you learned in school about humans gradually figuring out farming. This was the story of cross-species collaboration creating technologies and techniques that neither humans nor dogs could have developed alone. The earliest evidence comes from the Natufian settlements in the Jordan Valley, dating to 12,000 years ago. Dr. Danny Nadell's excavation at Ain Malaha revealed something that changed everything archaeologists thought they knew about early agriculture. Clear evidence that dogs were being trained for specialised agricultural tasks thousands of years before we thought farming even began. The site contains what can only be described as the world's first agricultural college, where humans and dogs worked together to develop the techniques that would transform both species from nomadic hunters into the founders of settled civilization. But here's where the working partnership story becomes absolutely incredible from a technological perspective. Dr. Susan Crockford's analysis of dog remains from early farming sites revealed that agricultural communities were systematically breeding dogs for traits that had never existed in wild wolves. Enhanced spatial memory for navigating complex field systems, modified vocalizations for long-distance communication across farmland, and most remarkably, behavioral modifications that allowed dogs to work independently while remaining responsive to human direction. These weren't just domestic animals helping with farm work. These were co-evolved partners whose genetic modifications made complex agriculture possible for the first time in human history. Think about what this means. When you see a border collie instinctively knowing how to herd sheep, or a livestock guardian dog protecting animals they've never been specifically trained to guard, you're watching the result of 10,000 years of genetic programming that transformed both species into perfect agricultural partners. The evidence from ancient Mesopotamia reveals working partnerships that were so sophisticated they seem almost magical. Dr. Benjamin Arbuckle's analysis of Çatalhöyük shows that by 8,000 years ago, humans and dogs had developed what amounts to the world's first automated farming systems. Dogs were trained to perform complex sequences of agricultural tasks with minimal human supervision, managing irrigation systems, protecting crops from pests, and most incredibly, participating in the selective breeding programs that improved crop yields. Archaeological evidence shows that dogs were being trained to identify and protect the best seed plants, ensuring that only the most productive varieties were allowed to reproduce. This wasn't just farming, this was agricultural research and development conducted by cross-species teams. But the working partnership that really transformed human civilization was the development of what Dr. Peter Mitchell calls pastoral nomadism, the revolutionary lifestyle that allowed humans to thrive in environments that would have been completely uninhabitable without canine partners. The evidence from Central Asian sites dating to 6,000 years ago shows that humans and dogs developed herding techniques so sophisticated that they could manage thousands of animals across vast territories with mathematical precision. Dr. Claudia Chang's research on ancient pastoral sites revealed evidence of rotational grazing systems that required coordination between human herders and specialized dogs over distances of hundreds of miles. These weren't simple relationships where dogs helped humans manage animals. These were complex logistics operations that required strategic planning, advanced communication systems, and mathematical understanding of carrying capacity, seasonal migration patterns, and resource optimization. The Bedtime culture of Kazakhstan, dating to 3500 BCE, provides the most incredible example of human-dog working partnerships. Dr. Sandra Olson's excavations revealed that these people had developed techniques for managing horse herds so large and sophisticated that they essentially invented the concept of industrial-scale animal husbandry. But here's the mind-blowing part. The archaeological evidence shows that the dogs were making independent decisions about herd management that humans couldn't have made themselves. Isotope analysis of horse remains shows that Bedtime dogs were selectively culling weak animals from herds, identifying optimal grazing areas, and even managing breeding programs that improved the genetic quality of domesticated horses. Dogs weren't just following human commands. They were actively participating in complex economic systems that required intelligence, judgment, and decision-making capabilities that rival human expertise. But perhaps the most remarkable working partnership developed in the mountains and forests, where humans and dogs created what amounts to the world's first search and rescue operations. Dr. John Hoffaker's analysis of Alpine archaeological sites revealed evidence of specialized mountain rescue dogs that were trained to locate lost travelers, provide emergency shelter, and guide rescue teams across treacherous terrain. Swiss and Austrian sites dating to 4,000 years ago contain the remains of dogs with genetic modifications that enhance their ability to navigate in snow, detect human scent over long distances, and most remarkably, make complex route-finding decisions in life or death situations. These weren't pets that happened to be good at finding people. These were professional rescue workers whose genetic programming and training made them capable of saving human lives in conditions where human rescuers would have failed. The evidence gets even more incredible when you look at maritime working partnerships. Dr. Torben Dean from the Danish National Museum discovered that Scandinavian fishing communities developed specialized water rescue dogs as early as 3,000 years ago. These dogs were genetically modified for swimming in cold water, trained to locate drowning sailors, and most remarkably, capable of making independent decisions about when to attempt dangerous water rescues. Archaeological evidence from Norwegian coastal sites shows that these maritime rescue dogs saved so many lives that they became central figures in Norse mythology. The original inspiration for stories about supernatural animals that could travel between the world of the living and the world of the dead. But the working partnership that might surprise you most was the development of what can only be described as ancient police dogs. Dr. Michael McKinnon's analysis of Roman military sites revealed that by 100 CE, Roman legions were using specialized military dogs for tasks that wouldn't be out of place in a modern police academy. These dogs were trained for crowd control, criminal apprehension, evidence detection, and most remarkably what appears to be early forms of forensic investigation. Roman military manuals describe dogs that could track criminals across long distances, identify specific individuals from scent evidence, and even distinguish between innocent civilians and hostile combatants during urban operations. The technological sophistication of these ancient working partnerships is almost impossible to comprehend. Dr. Kathleen Ryan from the University of Pennsylvania discovered that medieval European communities had developed specialized truffle hunting dogs with sensory capabilities so refined that they could locate underground fungi from distances of over a mile. The training techniques preserved in medieval manuscripts describe educational programs that took years to complete and required dogs to master complex scent discrimination tasks that modern science is only beginning to understand. These weren't just animals with good noses. These were biological detection systems whose sensory capabilities were orders of magnitude more sophisticated than any technology humans could create. But perhaps the most moving evidence of ancient working partnerships comes from disability assistance programs that developed thousands of years ago. Dr. Audrey Horning from Queen's University Belfast found evidence that medieval monasteries were systematically training dogs to assist monks with vision and mobility impairments. These early guide dogs were taught to navigate complex architectural environments, recognize dangerous situations, and provide physical support during daily activities. The training manuals that survive from these programs describe techniques so sophisticated that they wouldn't be out of place in a modern service dog academy. Medieval monks understood concepts like progressive training, positive reinforcement, and behavioral modification. Centuries before modern psychology developed these ideas. But here's what makes these ancient working partnerships so relevant to your life today. Every specialized skill that modern working dogs possess can be traced back to these ancient training programs. The search and rescue techniques used by modern emergency responders, developed in Alpine monasteries 1,000 years ago, the crowd control methods used by modern police dogs, perfected by Roman legions 2,000 years ago, the agricultural management strategies used on modern farms, created by Neolithic farmers 10,000 years ago. We didn't invent these working relationships. We inherited them from ancestors who understood that the partnership between humans and dogs could create capabilities that neither species could achieve alone. Looking at the archaeological evidence, you realize that working dogs weren't just tools that helped humans accomplish tasks. They were creative partners whose intelligence and capabilities expanded human potential in ways that shaped the entire course of civilization. Every time a modern working dog saves a life, protects property, or helps someone with disabilities live independently, they're honoring a tradition of service that stretches back to the very beginning of human civilization. But as remarkable as these ancient working partnerships were, they were about to face their ultimate test. Because the world was changing again, and the relationship between humans and dogs would need to evolve one final time. From practical partnership to something that transcended utility entirely, creating bonds that redefine what it means to love another living being. Everything changed when humans stopped moving. Around 10,000 years ago, as the last ice sheets retreated and the world warmed into the climate we know today, humanity made a decision that would transform not just our species, but our relationship with dogs in ways that neither could have anticipated. We chose to stay in one place and grow our food instead of chasing it across endless landscapes. For dogs, this wasn't just a lifestyle change. It was an existential crisis that threatened to end the most successful partnership in the history of life on Earth. Dr. Melinda Zeder from the Smithsonian Institution calls this transition the greatest challenge the human-dog partnership ever faced, and the archaeological evidence shows just how close we came to losing each other entirely during this revolutionary period. The problem was simple but devastating. Everything that had made dogs valuable partners for 20,000 years, their hunting skills, their endurance for long migrations, their ability to survive in harsh nomadic conditions, suddenly became irrelevant when humans settled down to farm. For the first time since Luna approached that ancient campfire, dogs had to prove their worth all over again. At early agricultural sites across the Fertile Crescent, Dr. Susan Colledge's analysis reveals a troubling pattern. During the initial phases of settlement around 9500 BCE, dog remains become increasingly scarce compared to earlier nomadic sites. It appears that many human communities were simply abandoning their canine partners as they transitioned to sedentary life. The dogs who had helped humans conquer the world were suddenly unemployed, and unemployment in the ancient world meant death. But here's where the story takes an incredible turn that shows the true depth of the bond between our species. Instead of giving up on each other, humans and dogs began one of the most remarkable reinvention processes in the history of any relationship. Dr. Benjamin Arbuckle's excavations at Çatalhöyük reveal that within just a few generations of settlement, innovative communities had developed entirely new roles for dogs that were perfectly suited to agricultural life. The archaeological evidence shows that dogs became the world's first property security systems, protecting stored grain from rodents and thieves. But more than that, they evolved into what Dr. Arbuckle calls biosensors, living early warning systems that could detect threats to crops, livestock, and human settlements with sensitivity that no human technology could match. Dogs learn to identify the specific sounds of different pests approaching grain stores, to detect the scent signatures of plant diseases before they became visible, and most remarkably, to distinguish between beneficial and harmful visitors to agricultural communities. But the most ingenious adaptation was how dogs became partners in what Dr. Dorian Fuller calls crop domestication, the process of transforming wild plants into the reliable food sources that made civilization possible. Archaeological evidence from early farming sites shows that dogs were being trained to perform incredibly sophisticated agricultural tasks. They learned to identify and protect the most productive individual plants, ensuring that only the best specimens were allowed to reproduce. They were taught to recognize optimal planting times based on environmental cues that humans couldn't perceive. Most remarkably, they participated in seed selection programs that gradually transformed wild grasses into the wheat, barley, and rice that feed the world today. Dogs weren't just adapting to agriculture, they were helping to invent it. Dr. Gregor Larsson's genetic analysis reveals that this agricultural revolution triggered the most rapid evolutionary changes in dogs since their initial domestication. Within just 2,000 years, agricultural communities had developed dog breeds specifically adapted for farming tasks that had never existed before. Guardian breeds with enhanced territorial instincts and modified sleep patterns that allowed them to remain alert throughout the night. Herding breeds with specialized intelligence for managing livestock in confined spaces. Pest control breeds with refined hunting instincts, targeted specifically at rodents and birds that threatened stored food. But perhaps the most remarkable development was the emergence of what Dr. James Serpell calls social dogs, breeds specifically designed not for any practical task, but for emotional support and companionship in the complex social environments of early towns and cities. For the first time in their partnership, humans were keeping dogs purely because they loved them. The Jericho site, dating to 8000 BCE, provides incredible evidence of this social revolution. Dr. Kathleen Kenyon's excavations revealed dog burials within family compounds that show clear evidence of dogs living as full members of human households. These dogs were fed the same foods as human children, given the same medical care when sick, and most remarkably, assigned specific social roles within extended family structures. Archaeological evidence suggests that dogs were becoming therapists, babysitters, and emotional support providers for humans, adapting to the psychological challenges of sedentary life. But here's where the Neolithic Revolution reveals something profound about human psychology that connects directly to your relationship with your dog today. Dr. Brian Hare's research at Duke University shows that the stress of transitioning from nomadic to sedentary life created psychological pressures that humans had never experienced before. Living in permanent settlements meant dealing with complex social hierarchies, property disputes, resource management, and most challenging of all, the emotional isolation that comes from being surrounded by the same people in the same place every day. Dogs provided something that no human institution could offer: unconditional emotional support that transcended the social complexities of early urban life. The evidence from Çatalhöyük is particularly moving. Analysis of stress markers in human remains shows that families with dogs had significantly lower levels of chronic stress hormones compared to families without dogs. Dogs weren't just companions, they were literally protecting human mental health during one of the most challenging transitions in our species' history. But the agricultural revolution also created new challenges that tested the human-dog bond in unexpected ways. Dr. Keith Dobney's analysis of urban archaeological sites reveals that as human settlements grew larger and more complex, conflicts arose about the role of dogs in society. Some communities embraced dogs as essential partners in urban life, while others viewed them as nuisances that competed with humans for resources. The earliest legal codes, including the Code of Hammurabi from 1750 BCE, contain detailed regulations about dog ownership, care, and responsibility. These weren't just administrative details. They were society's attempt to define the legal and ethical status of an entirely new kind of relationship. For the first time in history, humans had to develop laws about love. But perhaps the most incredible aspect of the Neolithic transformation was how it revealed the true intelligence and adaptability of dogs. Dr. Alexandra Horowitz's studies show that dogs living in early agricultural communities developed cognitive abilities that their nomadic ancestors had never needed. They learned to navigate complex social hierarchies involving dozens of humans with different roles and relationships. They mastered the timing and rituals of agricultural cycles that stretched across seasons and years. Most remarkably, they developed what can only be described as cultural knowledge, learned behaviors that were passed down through generations of dogs within specific communities. Dogs were becoming not just domesticated animals, but cultural beings with their own traditions and social learning systems. The evidence from ancient Mesopotamian cities shows that by 3000 BCE, urban dog communities had developed complex social structures that paralleled human society. Different breeds occupied different social niches, with specialized roles that required years of training and cultural transmission. Working dogs learned their roles not just from humans, but from experienced dogs who served as mentors and teachers. Archaeological evidence suggests that ancient cities had essentially created the world's first apprenticeship programs for dogs. But the most profound change was how the agricultural revolution transformed the emotional relationship between humans and dogs. Dr. Julian Kaminski's research at the Max Planck Institute reveals that dogs living in settled communities developed enhanced abilities to read human facial expressions, interpret vocal tones, and respond to emotional states. The constant close contact of village life created selection pressures for dogs who could provide emotional support, comfort during illness, and companionship during the long hours of agricultural work. Dogs were evolving to become better friends. The archaeological evidence shows that by the end of the Neolithic period, the relationship between humans and dogs had transformed from a practical survival partnership into something much more complex and emotionally profound. Dogs had become family members, with roles and relationships that went far beyond utility. They were confidants, protectors, playmates, and emotional anchors in communities that were still figuring out how to live together peacefully. Looking at this transformation, you realize that the agricultural revolution didn't just change how humans lived, it revealed what dogs could become when given the opportunity to be more than just tools for survival. The Neolithic period proved that the bond between humans and dogs was strong enough to survive the complete transformation of both species' ways of life. But it also set the stage for an even more remarkable evolution. The emergence of modern dog breeds and the development of relationships based purely on love, companionship, and mutual emotional support. As we approach the end of our journey through 30,000 years of partnership, the story of how ancient bonds evolved into modern love reveals truths about loyalty, devotion, and the power of interspecies friendship that will fundamentally change how you see your relationship with your own four-legged family member. Somewhere between the ancient world and today, something profound was lost, and something beautiful was gained. The question that haunts every dog lover is whether we traded the deep, respectful partnership our ancestors had with dogs for something more shallow, or whether we discovered a form of love that transcends anything the ancient world ever imagined. Dr. James Serpell from the University of Pennsylvania spent his career studying this transformation, and his conclusions might surprise you. After analysing thousands of years of human-dog relationships, he argues that we didn't lose the ancient bond. We evolved it into something that our ancestors could never have achieved. But first, let's be honest about what we sacrificed. Ancient humans respected dogs as equals, as partners whose intelligence and capabilities were essential for mutual survival. Archaeological evidence shows that decisions affecting both species were made collaboratively, with humans carefully observing dog behaviour and preferences before choosing courses of action. Modern humans, by contrast, often treat dogs as perpetual children whose primary purpose is to provide unconditional love and entertainment. We've created what Dr. Serpell calls neoteny addiction, an obsession with juvenile characteristics that keeps dogs dependent rather than empowering them as the capable partners they could be. But here's where the story gets more complex than simple nostalgia for the good old days. Dr. Patricia McConnell's research reveals that while ancient humans may have respected dogs more as working partners, modern humans have developed emotional bonds with dogs that are deeper and more psychologically sophisticated than anything in the historical record. Ancient burial practices show love and respect, but modern relationships show something unprecedented. Humans who modify their entire lifestyles around their dog's emotional needs, who spend fortunes on dog health care, who grieve for deceased dogs with intensity that matches the loss of human family members. We've created the first relationships in history where one species voluntarily sacrifices its own interest for the psychological well-being of another species. Think about your own relationship with your dog. Have you ever changed your work schedule to reduce their separation anxiety? Chosen a house based on whether it had a good yard for them? Spent money on their medical care that you wouldn't spend on yourself? Your ancestors would have found these behaviours incomprehensible. They loved their dogs, but they wouldn't have understood the concept of putting a dog's comfort before human practical needs. Yet, Dr. Alexandra Horowitz's studies show that this modern approach has created emotional bonds between humans and dogs that are measurably stronger than most ancient partnerships. Modern dogs and their owners show synchronized brain activity during positive interactions, release identical stress hormones during separation, and demonstrate attachment behaviors that mirror the strongest human relationships. We may have lost some of the ancient world's respect for dogs as capable partners, but we've gained something that might be even more remarkable: the ability to love another species with the same intensity we reserve for our own children. But the comparison reveals something troubling about modern dog breeding and ownership. Ancient peoples bred dogs to be capable, independent partners who could make complex decisions and solve problems creatively. Modern breeding often focuses on creating dogs who are physically appealing but psychologically dependent, animals who look cute but can't breathe properly, who are affectionate but can't survive without constant human care. Dr. Gregor Larsson's genetic analysis shows that many modern dog breeds have actually become less intelligent over time as breeders selected for appearance rather than cognitive ability. We've traded capability for cuteness, creating dogs who need us more but can do less. The most heartbreaking example is what's happened to working breed intelligence. Border collies, the descendants of dogs who could manage 1,000-head sheep flocks independently, are now often kept as pets in apartments where their intelligence has no outlet, leading to behavioural problems that their ancestors never experienced. We've created cognitive unemployment for some of the smartest animals on Earth. But here's where the modern story offers hope. We're also witnessing the emergence of relationships that transcend both ancient utility and modern cuteness addiction. Dr. Temple Grandin's work with therapy dogs reveals that modern humans and dogs are developing partnerships that combine the best of both worlds. Deep emotional bonds coupled with respect for dogs' natural intelligence and capabilities. Therapy dogs, service dogs, and emotional support animals represent a new kind of human-dog relationship that honors both species' needs while creating benefits that neither ancient partnerships nor pure companionship could achieve alone. Modern search and rescue teams, drug detection partnerships, and medical alert dogs show that when we combine ancient respect for dog capabilities with modern understanding of emotional bonding, we create relationships that are more powerful than anything in history. The key difference is choice. Ancient dogs worked because they had to. Modern working dogs choose to work because they find it fulfilling, and their human partners understand that a dog's happiness comes from using their natural abilities, not from being treated like permanent babies. But perhaps the most profound difference between ancient and modern relationships is our understanding of dog consciousness and emotion. Ancient peoples believed dogs had souls and could communicate with the divine, but they didn't have the scientific tools to understand how dog minds actually work. Modern research has revealed that dogs experience complex emotions, form detailed memories, and make sophisticated social calculations that our ancestors never imagined. Dr. Gregory Burns' MRI studies of dog brains show that dogs experience love, jealousy, anticipation, and even something resembling humor in ways that are neurologically similar to human emotions. This means that when your dog greets you with enthusiasm, comforts you when you're sad, or seems to understand your mood, they're not just following programmed behaviors, they're having genuine emotional experiences. Your relationship with your dog is a real friendship between two conscious beings who genuinely care about each other's well-being. Ancient peoples could only guess at this level of emotional complexity. Modern dog owners can know it with scientific certainty. The question facing modern dog lovers is whether we'll use this knowledge to create relationships that honor both the ancient tradition of partnership and the modern capacity for interspecies love. The best modern relationships combine ancient wisdom about respecting dog intelligence with contemporary understanding of emotional bonding. They create partnerships where dogs are neither tools nor toys, but genuine family members whose natural abilities are celebrated and whose emotional needs are understood. As we've journeyed through 30,000 years of human-dog partnership, we've seen love evolve from survival necessity to spiritual partnership, to working collaboration, to pure emotional bond. Each era brought losses and gains, mistakes and discoveries. But the story of Luna and her descendants isn't finished. It continues every day in the relationship between you and your dog, in the choices you make about how to love and respect the four-legged family member who shares your life. The legacy of 30,000 years of partnership lives on in every tail wag, every loyal look, every moment of interspecies understanding that bridges the gap between human and dog consciousness. Right now, as you listen to this story, your dog might be lying beside you, breathing softly in sleep. Their closed eyes are moving gently, chasing dream rabbits through ancient forests that their genes still remember. In those dreams, they're running alongside Luna herself, carrying forward an unbroken chain of loyalty that stretches back to the very beginning of our shared journey. Every behavior you see in your dog, every circle they make before lying down, every protective bark at a stranger's approach, every gentle nudge when you're feeling sad, carries within it the genetic memory of 30,000 years of partnership with humans. Dr. Adam Boyko's recent genetic studies have revealed something that will fundamentally change how you see your furry companion. Every modern dog, regardless of breed or size, carries within their DNA what he calls memory genes, genetic sequences that encode behavioral patterns developed during specific periods of human-dog evolution. When your dog instinctively knows to comfort you during illness, they're accessing genetic programming that developed when ancient dogs learned to detect human sickness through scent and behavior changes. When they position themselves between you and potential threats, they're following protective instincts that were refined over millennia of guarding human settlements. Your dog isn't just a pet who learned tricks. They're a living library of human history, carrying within their genes the accumulated wisdom of thousands of generations of dogs who perfected the art of loving humans. But here's what makes this legacy even more remarkable. It's still evolving. Dr. Brian Hare's research shows that modern dogs are developing new capabilities that their ancient ancestors never possessed. Contemporary dogs are better at reading human facial expressions than any dogs in history. They're more responsive to human pointing gestures, more sensitive to human emotional states, and most remarkably, they're developing enhanced abilities to comfort humans during psychological distress. Evolution hasn't stopped. Your relationship with your dog is actively shaping both species for the future. Think about the moments when your dog seems to understand you better than humans do, when they sense your mood before you've even realized it yourself, when they offer comfort without being asked, or celebration when you're happy. These aren't accidents or projections. They're the latest developments in 30,000 years of cognitive evolution designed to enhance interspecies communication. Your dog's brain has been shaped by millennia of partnership to be exquisitely sensitive to human needs and emotions, and your brain has been shaped by the same evolutionary forces to bond with and understand your canine companion. Dr. Takafumi Kikusui's research in Japan revealed that when you look into your dog's eyes, both of your brains release oxytocin, the same hormone that bonds human mothers to their babies. This means that your relationship with your dog triggers the same neurological responses that create the strongest bonds in human society. You and your dog are literally designed to love each other, but the legacy of Luna goes beyond just the emotional bond. It encompasses every aspect of human civilization that was made possible by the partnership between our species. Agriculture, which feeds billions of people today, was developed in partnership with dogs who helped manage crops and livestock. Urban planning, which shapes every city on Earth, evolved from the need to create spaces where humans and dogs could live together harmoniously. Even modern medicine owes debts to the partnership. Many life-saving drugs were first tested on dogs, and countless therapeutic techniques were developed by observing the healing power of human-dog bonds. The computer you're listening to this on, the building you're sitting in, the complex civilization that surrounds you, all of it traces back to advantages that humans gained by partnering with Luna's descendants. Your dog represents not just a personal relationship, but the foundation of human progress itself. Dr. Temple Grandin argues that dogs have made humans more humane. The cognitive abilities required to successfully partner with another species, empathy, communication across different types of intelligence, cooperation with beings who think differently than we do. These skills became the foundation for all human social progress. Learning to love dogs taught humans how to love each other across differences of culture, language, and belief. The tolerance and understanding that make modern diverse societies possible were first developed in relationships between humans and dogs. Every act of kindness you show your dog honors not just your personal bond, but the evolutionary forces that made human compassion possible. But with this legacy comes responsibility. As we've seen throughout our journey, the partnership between humans and dogs has always been a test of human character. When we've prioritized their well-being alongside our own, both species have thrived. When we've prioritized our desires over their needs, both species have suffered. The genetic health problems plaguing many modern breeds, the millions of dogs abandoned in shelters each year, the puppies bred in cruel conditions for profit. These represent the same moral failures that have plagued human-dog relationships throughout history, but they also represent opportunities for redemption. Every time you choose to adopt from a shelter rather than buy from a puppy mill, you're honouring the ancient tradition of mutual rescue that began when Luna approached that first campfire. Every time you train your dog with patience rather than force, you're continuing the legacy of partnership rather than domination that made the relationship possible. Every time you make a sacrifice for your dog's well-being, you're participating in the same tradition of interspecies love that has sustained both species for 30,000 years. The choices you make with your dog echo through history, connecting you to an unbroken chain of humans who chose love over convenience, partnership over control, understanding over ignorance. Dr. Patricia McConnell's research shows that dogs living in loving homes today are measurably happier, healthier, and more intelligent than dogs at any point in history. When humans choose to be worthy partners, dogs flourish in ways that honour their incredible potential. The relationship you have with your dog isn't just personal, it's political, ethical, and evolutionary. It's a daily choice to either advance or betray 30,000 years of mutual evolution. But here's the beautiful truth that emerges from our entire journey. When humans choose love, dogs respond with loyalty that transcends understanding. When we offer partnership, they offer devotion. When we provide security, they provide joy. The legacy of Luna lives on not in history books or archaeological sites, but in the gentle breathing of the dog sleeping beside you right now, in their trust when they fall asleep in your presence, in their excitement when you come home, in their patience when you're busy, and their comfort when you're sad. Every dog carries within them the genetic memory of that first brave wolf who chose to trust a strange species around a flickering fire. Every dog owner carries the opportunity to prove worthy of that ancient trust. As you look at your dog tonight, remember that you're seeing not just a pet, but the culmination of the most successful partnership in the history of life on Earth. You're holding the living legacy of Luna herself, brave, loyal, optimistic about the possibility of love between different species. The story that began 30,000 years ago with one wolf's leap of faith continues every day in your relationship with your dog. Every gentle touch, every shared walk, every moment of mutual understanding writes another chapter in the greatest love story ever told. And unlike the ancient stories preserved in bones and artifacts, this chapter is still being written. The ending isn't determined by the past. It's created by the choices you make, the love you offer, and the partnership you build with the four-legged historian sleeping peacefully beside you. Luna's legacy lives on in every human who chooses to be worthy of a dog's love. The question that remains is simple. What will your chapter in this eternal story say about the power of love to transform both species? The answer lies not in the past, but in the gentle rise and fall of your dog's breathing, and in the infinite possibilities that exist every time two different species choose to love each other, across the vast differences that should separate them, but somehow never do.